get started. We have a topic to discuss tonight, and it's a follow-up from our last meeting with the Governor's Island Trust. Welcome, Claire. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
I know Sarah is on as well. And we have a lot of questions. I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions and to get through. So we'll just go ahead and get started if we have a quorum. Let's see. I think okay, great. You have the presentation up?
Yes.
Okay. So please go ahead and take it away.
Okay, great. Thank you for
Unless I missed something. I'm sorry. Diana, did I miss something? Sorry. I'm a little nervous here.
No, I would just let folks know if they're not familiar with how these community board meetings work. We'll get the presentation from the Trust for Governor's Island on their proposed ULURP application. And then we'll open it up to Q&A and comment from the land use committee members and other community board one members. And then after that, we'll open it up to comment from the public. So I thank everybody in advance for their patience. We will get to everybody. And we will also circulate a link where you could submit written comment if you just stay with us as long as you need to, or if you have more to add than the time we're able to give tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Diana. Sorry, missed that whole bit. Yeah, so Claire, please go ahead and get started, because I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions, and we're going to try the speakers to probably about 2 to 3 questions. I think we have a bunch of people who've already signed up to ask questions. So.
Okay, sounds great. Thank you so much, Claire, and welcome everybody. And thanks everyone who's joining this evening to hear more about the proposed rezoning of the southern half of Governor's Island. We very much appreciate everyone's time on this. Before we jump in, I also just want to especially thank Tammy and Alice and Fern and Diana and the whole crew at Community Board One for working with us over the past weeks and months. This is our 4th presentation to the group, and we have, obviously found all of the comments and questions super helpful. And we'll be diving in tonight into more on the proposed rezoning. We're very excited to share this presentation. We know Governor's Island is an extraordinarily special place for New York City, and this is an opportunity for us to really expand access to the island and enhance and celebrate everything that is unique and fantastic about the island proper. Let's see if this is clicking. There we go. A brief recap. As everyone knows, this is, as I said, our 4th meeting in the community board this fall. We've been through a ton of information. We're not going to rehash all of that tonight for obvious reasons. However, all of these public presentations that are grayed out on the screen are available on our website for anyone who wants to go back and peruse those slides. Tonight, we're really going to focus on the financial details, which we know has been an area that folks have wanted to learn more. And we'll also share more details that was in the DEIS, which was published a couple of weeks ago, as well as go back through the zoning, as that's obviously the meat and potatoes of tonight's presentation. We have a full team on hand with us tonight to answer any questions that may come up or to respond to comments from the public. So I'm here. I'm Claire Newman. I'm the president of the Trust for Governor's Island. I'm joined by Chris Tepper and Sarah Krautheim, also from the Trust. From FX Collaborative, we have Jack Robbins and Ben Abelman. From Fried Frank, we have Wesley O'Brien, and from AKRF, we have Mike Beatty. So everybody who may be needed to answer questions about the EIS, the zoning proposal, and the financial analysis. Before diving into that, and just to frame tonight's conversation, we wanted to recap the vision that we've been presenting to the community board over the course of the past months. Hopefully everyone here is aware that we, the Trust for Governor's Island, are a 501c3 not-for-profit. Our sole mission, everything we focus on day in and day out, is thinking through how we can make Governor's Island an extraordinary public place for New Yorkers. And so, that goes into every question we answer on the island, whether it comes from the smallest detail about operations, up through thinking through how we can adaptively use some of the buildings on the North Island. That is really our guiding light. We've shared detailed information on the transformation timeline at the previous meeting. So without going back through all those details, we just wanted to remind folks that the idea of having mixed use development on the island, both in the Northern Historic District, but also ground up on the Southern Island, has always been a part of the vision for Governor's Island, even back when the federal government transferred the property to local control. The reason for that is both to support the island financially, but also to make it a fantastic 365 place. And I think somebody summed it up very well at our last meeting, which is Governor's Island can be as fantastic on a Tuesday as it is on a Saturday, and as wonderful a place to visit in February as it is in July. And we want to see that life on the island that we all know and love during the summertime on a year-round basis for the island. From the financial point of view, it can also support us do more access and more things for New York City residents. As I said, we'd love to get to year-round, more open hours. We'd love to increase ferry frequency so that people don't have to plan their trip to Governor's Island. They can just show up at the terminal and get on a ferry. Enhanced operational capacity. The reality is we're sort of barely keeping up with park maintenance today. We have a beautiful and very complicated park to maintain. And we can also provide more supportive services for field use, for arts and programming. And then from an amenity perspective, especially on the last call, we heard a lot of requests for additional cultural amenities, recreational amenities, water features. Revenue stream for the island can help us support all of that. But what kind of growth do we want to see on the island? And that has been a big part of the discussions to date. And what's the right fit for Governor's Island? So we came up a couple of years ago in partnership with elected officials, the community board, community advisory council, a series of 6 objectives, which we could use to think about what do we want to see on the island. And, you know, at the core of that, of course, is this mission that I talked about to make it an accessible year-round place, creating this path to self-sufficiency, celebrating what's unique about the island, its waterfront location, its fantastic ecology, providing a diversity of users. We've heard loud and clear from this community board in particular that we don't want a single monolithic user. Public engagement has been at the heart of what Governor's Island has done and what so many of our partners are doing. And maintaining access and affordability. We need to make sure that Governor's Island is always a place you can go with your family for the whole day without spending a dime. And so what we've come up with is a vision and a strategy that really focuses on 3 pillars. Continuing to make the park fabulous and enhancing that. Doubling down on arts and culture, which has really been a core of what we've done here on the island since day one. It has helped sustain so much of the island's increase in visitorship. We can do more public art, support more artists and small arts organizations. And then the sort of newest strand that we're adding to that is this idea around climate solutions that can really help drive some of the development on the island going forward. And, you know, the thing about these 3 pillars is that they're responsive to what has grown on the island organically and that what the community out there has fostered over the years. You know, we look at LMCC, who opened their art center just this fall. It's a fantastic adaptive reuse of a North Island building. They've been able to support programming and artists. We have New York Harbor School and Billion Oyster Project, who are really our first tenants on the island and are very much focused on these issues of climate and environment and education. And then our newest tenant, which should open sometime next year, is the QC Terme Spa and Resorts in the sort of bucket of public amenities. And in September of this year, we and the mayor's office announced a vision to establish a leading center for climate solutions on Governor's Island as a way to really anchor future use in the island in an educational use and create a cross-sector community around it and focused on one of the pressing issues of the 21st century. So, you know, that starts with bringing in this research or educational anchor, but it is going to create a diverse cross-sector community that surrounds it, including dorm and faculty housing, small-scale convening and hospitality, commercial operations and innovation. We can support more small businesses on the island. And then all of that, which is really a huge part of the unique opportunity on Governor's Island, is nesting that in a public space amongst cultural users and people who are visiting the island and can really engage in hands-on education. This series of renderings is not a design. We do not yet have a partner for this, but it helps to paint a picture of what a climate center on Governor's Island could look like. The first image here shows what a full build could look like across the island. This is an image of a potential educational user right at the foot of Yankee Pier, showing here how the island could be activated year-round, and adaptive reuse of the old theater property adjacent to future construction. This Western Promenade image seems to have something wrong with it, but we will correct that in the file that's sent around later tonight. And then here's the living laboratory along the southern part of the island. And then finally, Hammock Grove here shown as fully grown over the years and framed by the Eastern Development Zone. This is not going to happen overnight. We are really at the beginning of this journey. Right now, we're doing 3 things in parallel. Obviously, we are here before you about the rezoning of the South Island that would enable this vision to come to life. But at the same time, we are working on public strategic planning and public engagement. We'll talk more about that at the very end of the presentation, but really trying to engage folks in what that RFP says and what we're looking for from future users. And then third, outreach and marketing to prospective respondents to ensure that this is a successful proposition. That will play out, as I said, over the course of the next 7 months, gearing up to a solicitation sometime next calendar year. A brief reminder that we've talked a lot about this in this group. There's a number of different controls in place for the island. At the top of that sort of pyramid is the deed. When the federal government sold the island to GIPEC, which was jointly controlled by the city and state, the deed provided controls about certain prohibited, permitted, and prohibited uses. And those, no matter what happens with the zoning or the RFP, are in place for certain periods of time. The zoning, which is what we're here to talk about today, really creates the envelope. It expands upon the allowable uses and sets up restrictions in terms of height, in terms of lot coverage, in terms of where development can be located. And then finally, as I said, sometime next year, we'll put out a solicitation. And in that, we can address things like specifics around design, around resiliency criteria, sustainability, and say more about what we're looking for from a partner in terms of this climate solutions vision. And before we dive in, I'm about to turn it over to the for the financial section of the presentation. You know, we've heard a lot over the past couple of months about certain use areas, and we just wanted to take a minute to talk about, at a high level, about some of these key things. You know, again, as I mentioned, development on the island has been contemplated since the federal government turned the property over. And these particular development sites, which I sometimes call the lima beans, have been earmarked as the locations for this future development as far back as 2006. The park, when it was created, was really given what was thought of as the best part of the island, the center, and then the whole southwestern side of things, to make sure that there was continued access to the water and fantastic views of the Statue of Liberty. In terms of open space, we all know and love the park as it is today, the hills, Hammock Grove, Liggett Terrace. None of that is going away. It will not be touched. We're not going to lose so much as 1 inch of the park. In fact, it's going to be expanded upon. In terms of ownership and governance, the way we're proposing that this be structured is we are going to enter into ground leases with future tenants. And, you know, we as a public not-for-profit, all of our board meetings are open to the public. We have representatives from elected officials and this community board on our board. This will continue to be a public process. And then lastly, in terms of density, it's important to understand that the southern half of the island today allows up to a 1.0 FAR across the whole South Island. What we're proposing here is an increase to an effective 1.25 FAR, but pushing that development into the development zone so that we can leave the whole center part of the island as a sort of unsullied, uninterrupted park space. Just to give folks a little bit of a sense of what that density is like, what is it that we're proposing? When you boil the FAR down into those 2 development zones, it's about a 3. We looked across the city at other sort of campus-like developments or neighborhood-scale developments in recent history, just to see, and this was part of the planning process with FX Collaborative, who you'll hear from later, what do densities look like out there? And of these 6, we are the lowest density. The highest building heights being proposed are comparable to that at Cornell Tech and Brooklyn Bridge Park. The Passive House is about 300 feet. But obviously way below the sort of densities that you're seeing in Manhattanville or Battery Park City. Hudson Yards we put on here just because it's come up in the past, but it's on a different order of magnitude of development than obviously what would be appropriate for the island. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Tepper to talk through the financial model for the island. I know the community board has a lot of questions about that. We have all the details here for you today. And this really is critically important for us, creating this path to financial self-sufficiency so we can continue to maintain the island as a phenomenal public resource and indeed enhance it. Chris?
Thank you, Claire, and good evening, everyone. As Claire just said, we wanted to be clear about, both for ourselves and to talk about it tonight, in terms of how development on the island actually informs our path to self-sufficiency. And so to do that, we've built a 30-year pro forma using standard real estate methodology for projections of both our revenues and expenses. But to start out, we want to kind of ground ourselves in the present. And we've looked at this slide before, but it's a snapshot of our finances today. We have approximately $20 million operating budget that pays for park maintenance, that pays for the ferry, that pays for staff, and the upkeep of the fabulous park. That our current operating budget today is funded with approximately $15 million of city operating subsidy, which makes up about 75% of our budget. And the other 25% today comes from earned income from events, from the tenants that we have so far, from vendor fees, and from grants. So taking where we are today, I'll walk you through how we looked at built out this pro forma that extends 30 years. Thank you, Claire. One of the points I might want to make really clear is that we are including future income, rental income, from both the North Island historic buildings and the South Island new construction buildings, from the rezoning we're talking about tonight. And on the North Island, what that means is it's an adaptive reuse of a long-term ground lease of an existing building. And on the South Island, we're talking about leasing land long-term to private partners like an academic institution to do new construction. And those will have very different values associated with them. Next slide, please, Claire. So for starters, in doing a real estate pro forma, we have to figure out what our program is that we're projecting. And so we've put together a very kind of mission-based distribution of uses across the island, which is consistent with us having a large academic anchor on the South Island, as well as continued academic uses like the Harbor School on the North Island, having dormitory uses to support those academic institutions, including office, research and development space, hopefully to support spin-off businesses from an academic institution, amenity retail, small amounts of hospitality and convening on both the South and North Island, really a large amount of cultural space on both the South Island, 500,000 square feet, and continuing to lease up Nolan Park cultural campus and having other cultural users across the North Island. And then, of course, there needs to be some space reserved for maintenance and support and administration. So here you can see the distribution of uses across the North Island and the South Island that total the 5.8 million square feet of development potential across the island. Thank you, Claire. Then once we had our program set, and again, that's also consistent with our EIS, we had to look at, what are fair conservative rents that we can expect to achieve long term on these different types of spaces. And again, we have adaptive reuse North Island historic buildings where we're going to do leases as is, or of as is buildings where the private partner does most of the investment. That's leases like LMCC and the day spa that we have today. Then we have space leases on the North Island that we're projecting in the future, where the trust does redevelopment of a building and then actually leases small portions of the building to cultural or not-for-profit or for-profit users, and that's like what we're doing now in Nolan Park, and we issued an RFP for space there in March. And then the ground-up development that we're contemplating on the South Island. So to figure out what rents would be for each of those different types of leases, we looked at a really broad basket of information. We looked at appraisals from third parties for existing North Island buildings. We looked at the leases we've already done on the North Island buildings that came out of competitive RFPs. We spoke with brokers and market participants. We looked at market reports. And then I think most importantly, we went out and looked at a huge range of comps of ground leases that are in other public-private developments at similarly situated waterfront sites across the city. So that meant Brooklyn Bridge Park, Battery Park City, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, lots of other long-term ground leases in the South Street Seaport and others. And then really, of course, tried to adjust those for market conditions and things since, of course, each site is unique. And then finally, we followed the Department of Finance's assessment guidelines that they publish for how property taxes are generated off different types of uses. Next slide, Claire. And then we put that together, and it's essentially multiplication. We've made an assumption over how long it will take to lease up the various uses across the island. We have the use mix that I described, and then we had a big basket of rents. Now, on the rental revenue for income, like I said, there's higher rents for as-is buildings, lower rents for land where it's a long-term ground lease, different types of uses. But when you put all those things together and create a weighted average based off of the program that we're modeling, it comes out to about $4 a square foot in today's dollars. We, of course, grow that with inflation compounding year over year. And by 2050, over the course of this 30-year pro forma, the rental income grows to approximately $45 million a year. And on the property tax side, similar calculation, looking out over the 30 years. Of course, a large portion of our portfolio are not-for-profits, and so they won't pay property taxes. But for the portion that does, we see that growing to approximately $75 million by a year by 2050. Next slide, please. And then, of course, we haven't forgotten the other revenue, which actually makes up a big portion of our earned income today. We generate income from ferry fares. We host events. We want to continue to fundraise and working with the Friends of Governor's Island and going after other grants. This will always be a really important additional source of revenue for us, and we try to be aggressive and creative. I think this is the one source of income that has the most volatility based off the market, based off of who the president is at a grant-making organization. And so here we wanted to be really
Chris fell off.
Sorry, next slide. Now, on the expense side of the ledger, we really have two big buckets of expenses. We have our operating expenses, which go for paying for our maintenance, security, our ferry operations, staff time, and then the capital expenses, which are for capital projects like renovating buildings, all the utility infrastructure that we're putting in across the island, seawall repairs, building new ferries, all of our maritime infrastructure, piers, and the lift bridges and ferry terminals. On the operating expense side, today, we're at approximately $20 million. Over the next 30 years, we see that increasing to about $80 million. The primary driver there is the increasing ferry fleet that will be needed for expanded access year-round, 24/7. and also to accommodate increased numbers of users on the island. Additionally, of course, our other operating expenses will grow year over year as well, and we've assumed a compounding interest or inflation rate there. And on the capital reserve side, today and over the next 10 years, we have a capital plan with OMB, which is funded by the city. Looking out past this 10-year horizon, we want to make sure that we have enough saved annually that on average we can cover all of our capital expenses ourselves, so that when there's a hole in the seawall or a pier needs repair going out into the future, that we're self-sufficient and can fund those things, and so need to set aside a certain amount a year on average to cover those. I think the best source of information here was really looking at both kind of what we've planned to build out over the next 10 years and what the long-term useful life of those assets is, and then also looking at our pier, Brooklyn Bridge Park, across the Buttermilk Channel, who has very similar infrastructure, similar buildings, and a similar park to maintain and infrastructure to maintain, and has reserves about $10 million a year in today's dollars. And so, we're about twice the size. And so we're estimating we would need a $20 million a year capital reserve in today's dollars, which becomes about $40 million grown with inflation in 2050. Next slide, please. So when you put all of that together, the revenues, the property taxes, and our expenses, we could then really build out this 30-year pro forma. And you'll see on the first two lines, starting with today and growing to 2050, the amount of revenue and tax revenue that we estimate earning off of the program that I outlined earlier on the North Island. Similarly, the same calculations for earned revenue and property taxes for the South Island. That takes a little longer because it's new construction. And then the other revenue line in here as well, summing to the $5 million that we earn today, hopefully growing to $24 million in a decade, $64 million 10 years after that, and $126 million in the 30-year horizon that we're looking at. Now, when you just look at our operating expenses, again, that's $20 million today. We see that growing with expanded use to $35 million, then $60 million, and $78 million. But what you can see here is on an operating expense basis alone, we see ourselves becoming self-sufficient in approximately 20 years, where we're not paying for all our capital expenses, but we are able to pay for all of our operating expenses. That's a 20-year time horizon. When you factor in starting to self-fund our own capital reserve, again, starting after our 10-year existing capital plan, so really starting around 2030, then you need to go out until 2050 before we're generating enough income on the island itself to cover all of our capital expenses as well. So we see ourselves being operating self-sufficient by 2040 and fully self-sufficient for both operating and capital by 2050. Next slide, Claire. This is a snapshot, again, a little bit more detailed than I think we had an earlier version of this, but that breaks down what we were just looking at, but in a graph form, so that you can see, or in a chart form, so that you can see what proportion by 2050, where our revenues are coming from, what percentage that makes up. So 20%, really the North Island altogether is making up about a third, 33% of all of our revenue. The South Island is making up about pretty much the other third. And then we have about 5% of revenues coming from this, the kind of less stable other income source I mentioned from grants and fundraising. And then on the expense side, you can see our expenses have grown to about 80 million, and our capital reserve in 30 years would be about 42 million. Thank you, Claire.
Claire, you're on mute.
Thank you, Sarah, my hero. We'll turn it over now to talk about the EIS. I think Wesley is going to lead this section.
Yes, good evening. Wesley O'Brien of Freed Frank. I'm Land Use Counsel to the Trust, and I'm here to discuss the draft environmental impact statement that was issued by the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Housing and Economic Development. So first, I'm going to talk about the analysis framework that was used for the EIS, and then provide an overall summary of the findings. And then finally, we'll take a closer look at the anticipated effects and mitigation measures that have been identified in a few of the environmental technical areas. So Claire, if you could go back one slide, please. The draft EIS is actually the second supplemental to the generic EIS that was originally issued in 2011. So in 2011, the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development issued a generic EIS in connection with the construction of the park and open spaces that we all now enjoy. So while redevelopment of the South Island and retenanting of the North Island were anticipated at that time, there were no specific proposals or zoning actions at that time, so generic assumptions were used about the redevelopment in those areas. Then in 2013, as the Trust applied for a rezoning to allow for commercial uses on the North Island, there was at that time, the Office of the Deputy Mayor issued a first supplement to the generic EIS, and that supplement assessed whether the North Island rezoning would result in any new or different impacts than were previously disclosed in the generic EIS. So now, in conjunction with the proposed South Island rezoning, a second supplemental EIS has been prepared to assess its specific effects and, again, to determine whether the rezoning would result in any new or different impacts than were previously disclosed. Next slide, please. So turning to the analytical framework, the analysis year for this EIS is 2030. So that's the year in which the EIS looks to determine whether there will be potential impacts as a result of the full build-out. I'll just note here that in contrast to the financial models, which Chris was walking you through, a longer-term frame is conservative for financial modeling, whereas for environmental impacts, we've looked at a closer build year, a closer analysis year, which really is the worst case and is conservative because it assumes more overlapping and intense construction periods in order to get to that 2030, and then thereby gives you a true reasonable worst case of what potential impacts could be. As far as the program goes, the EIS considers actually two different programs, one weighted more heavily towards university uses and one weighted more heavily to office uses, but you'll notice that it is a mix of overall the same types of uses. And what that does is it allows in the EIS for there to be disclosure of, to look at the effects of these various programs to make sure that the true worst case is being considered for each of the technical areas. Next slide, please. So based on these two development scenarios and using the methodologies set forth in the the Citywide Environmental Review Technical Manual, the EIS concluded that there would not be significant adverse impacts with respect to most of the technical areas. So for example, the EIS concluded that the rezoning would not result in significant socioeconomic impacts as a result of business or residential displacement. With respect to open space, similarly, the EIS determined that given the amount of existing open space on the island and the amount of new open space that would be created on the South Island in conjunction with rezoning, that the rezoning would not overburden the open spaces and that the new population in particular would not cause an impact with respect to those open spaces. On the other hand, the potential for significant adverse impacts was disclosed with respect to transportation and then construction phase transportation. Next slide, please. So based on feedback that we've received, we're going to take a closer look at the anticipated effects with regard to transportation, construction, and shadows. Next slide, please. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mike Beatty of AKRF to discuss the transportation analysis.
Thanks, Wesley. Again, Mike Beatty with AKRF. We conducted a pretty robust transportation study as part of this EIS. It required a high level of coordination with both City DOT and New York City Transit. The study did find significant adverse impacts, which we will detail on the upcoming slides. But just for some more background and context, Governor's Island is unique in that you could only get to it on a ferry. So the study areas were kind of developed based on two elements. One was how passengers and visitors would access the two passenger terminals. So that's the Battery Maritime Building in Manhattan and Pier 6 in Brooklyn. And then the other element we looked at was how freight would arrive at the island to support the South Island development. And so in that, we looked at 4 potential freight terminals along the Brooklyn waterfront, and that was Brooklyn Navy Yard, Atlantic Basin, the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, and the 52nd Street Pier. So with that, you end up coming with a pretty large study area. We looked at 52 intersections, and while not on the slide, we also looked at over 70 pedestrian elements. We're talking about sidewalks, crosswalks, corners, and over 70 subway elements, so stairs, escalators, turnstiles. And in that analysis, if we look at the different technical areas, there were impacts for vehicular traffic. That's how intersections operate. Pedestrian impacts, so again, that's at the sidewalk, crosswalk, corner level, and transit impacts. And by transit, we're talking about elements at a subway station. So how well the stairs work, how well the escalators work. There were no impacts for the subway line haul analysis or bus line haul analysis, no vehicular and pedestrian safety impacts, and no parking impacts. Next slide. So talking about vehicular traffic analysis, in Manhattan, we identified 11 intersections that had a significant impact. 2 of those could be fully mitigated, and that's through signal timings. 9 of them could not be mitigated, whether through signal timings or new striping. We just weren't able to mitigate them. And another thing to point out is we also looked at the weave section. So that's on the FDR, going northbound, southbound, so pretty much adjacent to the B&B terminal. And those were also unmitigated. In Brooklyn, kind of a similar story. There were 11 intersections that had impacts. 4 of them could be fully mitigated through signal timings. 1 was partially mitigated, and then 6 intersections could not be mitigated. Turn over the pedestrian analysis. There were 17 either crosswalks or corners with impacts. 7 of them could be fully mitigated. And this is really when you start widening crosswalks or you create those curb bulb outs to shorten the crosswalk distance, while 10 locations could not be mitigated. And then for sidewalks, 5 sidewalks had impacts. 2 of them can be mitigated, whether through widening or reconfiguring the sidewalk to adjust some of the obstacles, and 3 were unmitigated. And the thing we'll point out, and we'll touch on a little bit, is that even for these sites that are mitigated and unmitigated, there is a mechanism to keep tracking how these are doing through the Transportation Monitoring Plan, but we'll touch on that in a second. Next slide. And then within the subway system, we identified 6 elements that would have a significant impact, 5 stairways and 1 escalator. One of these could be fully mitigated, one of the stairways, and that's really done through reconfiguring the stairway to provide more width for pedestrians going up and down the staircases. 3 of the stairways and 1 escalator were partially mitigated, again, through reconfiguring, or in the case of the escalator, potentially speeding up the escalator. And 1 stairway was unmitigated, and that's really attributed to physical constraints of the subway. And all these have been developed in coordination with New York City Transit. Next slide. So one of the things is that we realize is that the transportation system is constantly evolving, and that's in 2 aspects. One, it could be what's happening to the network itself. There could be other projects going on that changes the configuration of these roadways. But at the same time, it could be a difference of how Governor's Island actually is built out. So what the trust has decided to do is cover all the costs associated with the transportation monitoring program. So that's from data collections and analysis to design of mitigations and construction of the capital improvements. And again, this is something that's done in coordination with City DOT. There are certain checkpoints we have to meet, and that's how we'll at least continue to monitor the transportation network. Next slide. And then in terms of construction, touch back what Wesley said. Again, what we did was look at a 10-year build out. And so when you look at a 10-year build out, you then kind of squeeze the construction envelope so that all these sites are kind of being built on at once. So you have this worst case scenario of the amount of traffic coming to the ferry terminals to get to the island. In this case, the assumption was, at least for traffic, there'd be all construction workers would funnel through the B&B. And when we looked at that, at least for this traffic, there were 2 intersections that were impacted, but we could not mitigate. Again, these are temporary impacts, as once construction is done, the impact goes away. And then similarly with pedestrians, there was one impact at a crosswalk. We did not notice any parking, transit impacts, or no air quality and noise impacts. I think, Wesley, I turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mike. So as part of the construction analysis in the DEIS, there was also a study undertaken of potential hazardous materials or air quality impacts. And so while the EIS did not find that there would be any potential impacts in these areas, the trust did commit to a number of measures that would minimize any potential effects from these sources. And I'll just note here that as landlord during development, the trust will be able to require that any designated developer implement these measures through its leases and other requirements on the ongoing redevelopment. So with respect to hazardous materials, the trust has entered into they have put out a remedial action plan and a construction health and safety plan, which would ensure that there's no potential hazmat impacts. And then also with respect to air quality, there are a number of measures that the trust would be requiring to minimize any pollutants. That includes dust suppression measures, idling restrictions, and the use of ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel. Also, the use of best available technologies during construction would be required. And then more generally, the trust is planning for a public engagement process that will continue during construction. They will have assigned personnel to coordinate with contractors and maintain up-to-date information about any development that's going on the trust website. There'll be a process whereby the trust can receive comments from any parks users on how they're being affected by construction, if at all. And then, of course, there'll be flaggers at key access points to ensure the safety of all park users during construction. Next slide, please. Turning now to the shadow study. So although a specific design is not proposed, the shadow study was put together that assumed development to the maximum heights that would be permitted at each development parcel. And then conservatively, it modeled development that would have approximately 850,000 square feet more development than would be permitted under the rezoning. So essentially, the EIS looks at a building model that assumes almost 20% more development than you could actually have under the rezoning. So that gives you a really conservative outer limit of what the shadows would look like. The shadows model looks at certain representative dates, such as the summer and winter solstice and the spring and fall equinox. And so based on the results from the study, the lead agency, along with various involved agencies, reviewed to see whether the shadows would significantly impact park users or significantly impact any plantings. So let's look at the results of the model. If you could go to the next slide, please. So this slide shows the spring and fall equinox. And what you'll notice here, particularly in the gray areas where the shadows are indicated, these are really large development parcels. So the vast majority of the shadows are really falling within the development parcels. So that it'd be more clear, we've highlighted the incremental shadows outside of the development parcels in red. And you can see that how the shadows would move through various times of the day, starting in the morning, midday, and on to the afternoon. Next slide, please. And this slide shows a period that is midway between the spring and fall equinoxes and the summer solstice. And again, and here you're seeing that the shadows become more modest than in the previous slide. Next slide, please. And here's the summer solstice, which corresponds more with the peak of the public access season. And as you would expect, as the sun is at the highest point in the sky, the shadows are the smallest in this area. Next slide. The other extreme is the winter solstice. This period shows the greatest extent, particularly in the morning. But of course, on December 21st, this is outside of the growing season and outside of the public access season. So the shadow shown here would not affect plantings or park users. So based on this, the reviewing agencies concluded that the rezoning would not result in significant shadows impacts. Next slide, please. So as a summary, the EIS disclosed that the rezoning would only result in potentially significant impacts with respect to transportation and construction transportation. So as for next steps, the DEIS is publicly available for everyone to read and comment on. The city planning will be having a hearing where where the public comments will be accepted, and that is anticipated for February 2021. It has not been scheduled yet. And then thereafter, the public comment period will stay open for an additional 10 days in case anybody has written comments. And then after that, the final EIS will be published at least 10 days before the City Planning Commission vote, which is anticipated in March of 2021. Next slide, please.
Great.
And with that, I'll hand it back to Claire.
Thanks, Wesley. We're going to jump now into the zoning section. Folks who've joined us over the past couple of sessions, you'll find these slides familiar, so we're going to move as quickly as we can to get to questions and public comment. But as a very brief reminder, essentially the zoning proposal is, one, to expand the list of allowable uses on the South Island to actually mirror what is allowed by the deed. Currently, the island is zoned R32. We cannot do permanent residential. And then we're adding use groups for research and development and small scale production. These are all allowed on the North Island today. The whole open space center of the island will be protected and expanded. And then lastly, as we've covered, it hard caps the amount of developable square footage at 4.27 million square feet, which is an effective FAR of 3. That's just on the 2 development zones. As I mentioned earlier, if you looked at the whole South Island, it's more like 1.25. We worked over the past couple of years to establish design guidelines to really help frame what the rezoning proposal would look like. And since then, we've been working with FX Collaborative to come up with a proposed zoning envelope. And they have taken these, and we have taken these design guidelines very much into all of the considerations you're going to see today. They include things like creating connectivity between the water and the park, creating a harmonious relationship with the park, maintaining important view corridors, and just in general, making sure that the development parcels complement and continue to enhance us as a public space. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jack Robbins at FX Collaborative to walk us through the zoning framework. Jack?
Claire. Thank you, Claire. Again, I know some of you have seen some of these before. Forgive the repetition, but I think this will be helpful for anyone who has not seen it. So just a little quick history. This is what the island started out as, not at all the shape that we know it today, when it was a hunting ground for the Lenape Indians. Sort of the next. It first became a military outpost in the Revolutionary War, and it would remain a military outpost for the next 3+ years, but takes a lot of different shapes over that time. Next. Most notably, the South Island was created with fill from some of the first subway lines that were dug in New York. That was brought out here, and then during World War I, it took on that South Island took on a very kind of industrial character. Next. When it came under the Coast Guard, the South Island was built out in a very different way. Integration of buildings and open space, some addition of some playing fields. The buildings, I will say, maybe not of as quality and character as those on the North Island. Go to the next. And then came the master plan and the creation of the park and the development zones, and really creating an incredible destination for New Yorkers and for those from far beyond New York come Governor's Island. Next. Just an aerial photograph so you can see what that was like in the kind of Coast Guard era. Lots of buildings, lots of development on the South Island. So development is not something new for the South Island. And then this fantastic master plan that West 8 did with this incredible park and these 2 development zones on either side. And from the very beginning, this vision for the South Island was about integrating park and open space with the development zones, and presents this, incredible, once in a lifetime opportunity to set a new standard for how to do that, for sustainability and for integrating green space and buildings. Go to the next. Those development zones today are largely fenced off. Some of those buildings that we saw in that aerial photograph are still there, have not yet been demolished, but will be demolished. And so the zones that will become the development zones are not part of the park today. They're not things that people are experiencing. They're places that very few people have actually been, at least in recent years. Go to the next. So I'm going to walk through some of these urban design principles and what they mean, and then we'll sort of get into how those actually shape the zoning. One of the absolute key principles was to connect the two major assets of the island, this incredible park and the waterfront, and the incredible views and experience of the New York Harbor that waterfront gives you. And so one of the key ideas was to have those two zones kind of weave through the development zones and really sort of bleed into each other, so that that's kind of one continuous experience. Go to the next. One of the models that we look to for that kind of integration of open space and development is something that I'm sure this community boards are familiar with in Battery Park City. We'll have significantly more open space, not just in numbers, but in percentage than Battery Park City, but I think it provides a good model for how green spaces can kind of coexist and weave through development areas. And I think we can do even better than this, really push that envelope. Another key element was to enhance one of the great assets that the island has in this waterfront esplanade. So we have widened the esplanades on both sides of the island, both to create sort of generous public spaces, also to allow space for dealing with resiliency issues. Buildings or maybe even grade level are going to need to be elevated to deal with flood elevations, and we want to make for smooth transitions within that zone, not create kind of walls along the waterfront, but allow those to be nice, gentle transitions. Go to the next. Yankee Pier is going to be the gateway for this area of the South Island, and they serve a lot of the North Island as well. It's really the most viable entry point, and as just basic good urban design principle, transit-oriented development, we put the higher density close to the transportation. It's easy to forget sometimes how big this island is, and that it can actually take quite a while to walk from one side to the other. So to help encourage people to come here, we want to make sure that the development is easily accessible from the transportation and vice versa. And then we want to be very sensitive to the transition between the North Island and the South Island. There used to be, Division Road. It's still there in a kind of legal sense, Division Road. Although it's no longer this sharp straight line that cuts off the South Island from the North Island. The West 8 Master Plan introduced these curving paths, brought them into the courtyards of Liggett Hall, and we have sort of built upon this series of kind of courtyard spaces that in this zone that divides the North Island and South Island, as that sort of integration between building and open space. So we've created Yankee Pier Plaza. There's also a set of special controls along this kind of transition between the North Island and South Island for any development on the South Island. It helps to make a nice transition in terms of height and really sensitive to the context to the north. You can see in the, and we'll go into a little bit more in the rendering on the left, Kings Road, which is right here. I don't know if you can see my pointer, but it connects one of the roads that will connect the North Island to the South Island, and it's really an extension of the fabric of the North Island. Next, please. And then a whole series of different kinds of nodes and paths. So some of those nodes fairly obvious in terms of the arrival point at Yankee Fair Plaza, the oval because of its, sort of special perfect geometry in the midst of all of these other kind of waving curves of the park really creates this special place. We want to be sure and connect those, both of those places to other areas in the North Island and to each other, or even places where there's a kind of coming together of different paths. So if you look along the edge of the west parcel where a bunch of different paths kind of come together, that also creates a node. We want to be sure to acknowledge that in the design. So we've created a flexible envelope, and it is just an envelope. It's not, we have not designed buildings. We have tested these zoning regulations with lots of different building forms and building configurations. We feel that we have created a set of zoning controls that will enable and development and enable a kind of flexibility, but at the same time really preserve all of those fantastic, unique qualities that Governor's Island has today. Next. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben Abelman.
Thanks, Jack. So I'm here to kind of walk through and translate how the zoning framework and the concepts embedded in it translated to the actual text. So the first item to discuss is the land use actions that we are applying for this rezoning, and those are two. The first being a zoning map change, which is intended to draw the Governor's Island special districts to not only cover the North Island, but for it to cover the entire island. And then it will be to change the Southern Island zoning from an R3 to a single family residential zoning district to a C41 district, which is a medium density mixed use district. It's important to note that the North Island zoning is unchanged in the zoning proposal. Next. So once we've established the new zoning overlay of the new zoning districts, we are subdividing the island into two different sub-districts. And then on the southern side, the southern sub-districts, dividing that into three sub-areas. So the three sub-areas of the southern sub-district consist of the eastern development sub-area and the western development sub-area, and these are the only locations where new development can exist. And then the open space area is established to ensure that the open space in the park that is there today remains publicly accessible and open as open space. Next. The zoning regulations, in order to create flexibility and to encourage good design, is really established within 4 different datums. There are the ground control regulations, which control where rights of ways are, where key nodes are positioned, and general open space regulations that are within the development subareas. Then there's the base section, which is the base of the building up to 75 feet, the middle portion of the building, and then the upper portion of the building. And as you can see in this diagram, there's a general tapering from a larger footprint at the base to a narrower footprint as we move up. Next, please. So now I'm going to walk through the series of ground plane controls. So The slide you see.
Ben, can you go back one just real quick? I apologize. I didn't add to the top fast enough. Thanks.
Pardon?
Just good. I was adding. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay. So the ground plane controls are established to really create the development parcels within the development zones. On the eastern development sub-area, there will be 4 development parcels, whereas the western sub-area will be 1 development parcel. And those parcels are created by additional open space, which are primary connections. The intention of the primary connections is not to be mapped specifically as you see it here on this slide shown in the green arrows, but to allow those green arrows to really be anywhere within that green hatched area. That provides flexibility to really tailor the parcels to the program within the RFP. In addition to the primary connections, there is a requirement for public open space, which is in the zoning will be called Yankee Pier Plaza, which is a minimum 25,000 square feet kind of gateway at the foot of Yankee Pier, acting as an entry to the island. In addition, on the slide, it's important to note that the esplanades are widened from their current conditions, 55 feet on the east, and then it will be widened to 75 feet on the west. Next. So as you can see on this slide and the following slide, these are just 2 examples of the flexible framework or the flexible zoning tools in how these parcels can be crafted. So within that green hatched area, we could have these curved swaying lines kind of mimicking the geometries that we find in the park, or in the next slide, a more rectilinear parcel organization. And I'm going to use this rectilinear parcel organization as kind of the base case to walk you all through the rules. So in addition to the primary connections in Yankee Pier Plaza and the widened esplanades, there will be open space within the development parcels themselves. And that's shown here with the green hatch again, with the green arrows. Again, these are flexible zones where secondary connections can be located or required to be located within the parcels indicated. These secondary connections could be open to the sky, but they can also be enclosed passing through buildings. Next. So now we're going to zoom into parcel E2 and just take a look at how all of this is coming together. In addition to the secondary connections, the primary open space, primary connections, Yankee Pier Plaza, there are other regulations that will really create more public open space. And that is a regulation, one of those rules is a regulation that requires any building portion that is set back from a parcel boundary, that space between a public access area, the esplanade, primary connections, or the park, Yankee Pier Plaza as well, must become open space. So these areas where you see and highlighted with the neon green are building footprints which are set back from that parcel edge, and then that neon green would then have to become part of the public open space of the development zone. Next. And then here we're seeing the secondary connection taking its kind of diagonal path around the building footprints within this illustrative building, within this illustrative footprints on parcel E2, where it would enter from the esplanade and then exit towards the oval. But we're showing the secondary connection passing through a building at that northwest corner. Next. So it's important to kind of tally up all of these additions of open space. Right now, the park is 43 acres. And then if we add on the existing esplanades, it gets us up to 46 acres. Next slide. With all of these additions, the expanded park, which we have on, which there are certain areas located adjacent to Picnic Point, which are currently fenced off, which will be turned over to park, will be added into the open space. The widened esplanades will add, over an acre. Yankee Pier Plaza will be just over minimum, just over half an acre. And then the primary connections themselves in this configuration, also most will approximately account to 40 4 acres. So really in the development zone, within the development zones, there'll be about just over 8.5 acres of additional public open space. Next. And so if we look at, the percentages of open space on the North Island, the total lot area of the North Island subtracted by the building footprints, there's about 85% of that North Island is publicly accessible open space. Within the South Island, we would have 70% open space, and this assumes the most aggressive amount of lot coverage that we would be able to have. So it could very well be closer to that 85%, and then in total, the island will be 80% open space and 20% building. So now let's go above the ground plane and talk about the bulk regulations. So as I mentioned before, the bulk regulations are divided into these 3 datums: base, middle, and upper. The base portion of the building is predominantly established between the design flood elevation and 75 feet above the design flood elevation. There are a couple of exceptions of the maximum base heights. For buildings that front solely onto the esplanades, there's a maximum base height of 60 feet. And then adjacent to transportation at Yankee Pier Plaza, we are permitting a higher base height of 90 feet. In addition to the height controls, the controls in terms of the size of buildings are controlled really by lot coverage, where we're permitting up to 80% lot coverage to allow large, low floor plate buildings. But we're establishing a regulation that limits the length of a building to not be more than 400 feet. And this is really to ensure kind of this porosity through the development parcels themselves. In addition to the maximum building length, there's articulation requirements so that we just don't have a long blank street wall. And also, again, to ensure porosity, we have 30 feet. We need to maintain 30 feet between buildings as a minimum distance. The mid regulations are between 75 and 125 feet. The lot coverage here turns down. So we go from 80% at the base to 50% at the middle. The minimum distance turns up. So as we're moving up, the footprints get smaller and the space between the buildings gets larger. So it's a 60-foot minimum distance at the middle section. And then the upper building portions are controlled by lot coverage, which is 30%, really reducing the size of building footprints above the middle section. In addition to a percentage lot coverage, each individual upper portion a floor plate cannot exceed 30,000 square feet. So we can only have 30,000 square foot increments above the 125 feet. In addition, we have the minimum distance between buildings, which expands to 90 feet. And then we have maximum building height controls, which, as you will see in the next slide, can be exceeded by permitted obstruction. So the maximum building heights vary by parcel. W1 and E2 both have a maximum building height of 300. Parcel E1, which is just to the west of parcel E2, is 230. And then the remainder, E3 and E4, have a maximum building height of 200. In addition to the size and lot coverage of upper building portions, there are controls really to ensure that we're not creating a wall above a base parallel to the waterfront on the eastern development zone. So we have rules that really are promoting the narrow face of the building being closest to the water, but optionality to allow a building that runs more north-south if it is pushed far away from the water. Next. So the maximum building heights, as I mentioned, can be exceeded by permitted obstructions. And so what these are typically elevator and stair overrides, mechanical bulkheads, We believe that an oversized because of the location in the middle of the harbor and within for resiliency purposes, we are providing ample room on the top of the buildings to include all of the important mechanical systems. So we can exceed the maximum building height by 40 feet with the size of the footprint below, and then by an additional 20 feet, but that footprint size must be no greater than 50% of the footprint below. Next. So there are the controls which I just explained are really kind of consistent throughout the entire both development sub areas, but there are some special controls which I wanted to point out. One of those is just kind of activating the ground floor, and so one of the ways that zoning typically does this is through transparency requirements. And so adjacent to secondary connections where they pass into buildings, there will be transparency requirements to really kind of highlight and indicate the uses and invite people into these spaces. And then in addition, there's transparency requirements adjacent to Yankee Pier Plaza, which we see as kind of that gateway to the island and to the new development. Next. In addition to the regulations about tower orientation within the upper zones, there is one very specific regulation which is specific to the first building adjacent to Yankee Pier Plaza. So if a upper portion is within that first 200 feet within Yankee Pier Plaza, it cannot be perpendicular to the waterfront. And the reason here is that Division Road, which we see as this kind of straight line that cuts across the island here, is coming in at an acute angle from the waterfront. And so we do not want to pinch the space at Yankee Pier Plaza, and we want to ensure an open corridor to permit light and air and kind of that entry point into the park. So this tower, we're not prescribing a specific orientation. It can be oriented anywhere from parallel to Division Road or oriented to optimize solar gain and passive heating and cooling. And we can orient the building true east-west. Next. In addition to, so setbacks are established from the primary connections and from the park are typically 15 feet. But there are a few special conditions where we have deeper setbacks, one of which is the transition zone, which is a zone that is measured from the Division Road sub-district boundary line, and it is offset to the south by 150 feet. That 150 feet from Division Road cannot have any anything above a base. So this ensures a deep setback, not only in parcel E2, but in parcel E1 from the northern sub-district. But it also pushes any upper building portion on the western development parcel further south. Next. So now looking at parcel W1, which is unique because it is the development sub area and a parcel all in itself. It will have the secondary connection requirement, which you see in this massing kind of bifurcating the site. But there are specific base height regulations here. One of which the main base height regulation is really we're requiring we're limiting the maximum base height at the southern end of the Western Development Zone to 50 feet in that first 100 feet from the south. And that's really to step down towards, a future park amenity and kind of the views out to Statue of Liberty, and also to kind of step down towards Outlook Hill. In addition to the special base height controls on parcel W1, we have limitations as to where upper building portions can be located. So that first one, so the areas which you see in gray and in red are areas where we cannot have any building portion, upper building portion. So this is the first 100 feet from the south of the Western Development Zone, the first 100 feet from the Western Esplanade, so a setback of 100 feet would be the minimum setback that we can have. And then we have the transition zone of 150 feet that really creates this more limited area where we can have upper building portions. And this is really crafted in ensuring that we have good views towards Lower Manhattan from Outlook Hill. Next. In addition to the lot coverage regulations that 30% for the upper building portions, maximum floor plate sizes in the upper zone within the Western Development sub area is capped at 27,000 square feet, or 10% of the total area of the Western Development Zone. Next. And so here we see the kind of test case, which we've just walked through, applied to all of the different parcels. You see passing through the ghosted buildings, secondary connections, the woven open space, really a variety of building heights, which can be adaptable to the eventual programs, and really kind of a network of new open space that connects visitors, not of the development zones, to the park, and from the park to the development zones. So next. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jack to discuss some view studies.
So we've had a number of questions from members of the community board, members of the public, and so we want to try and address some of those questions directly. And one of those questions has been about the views and what the impact on the views would be. So I'll show you a series of some view studies and some renderings to try and answer that question. Next. There was a question about the view from Outlook Hill. So this is showing the development on the Western Development Zone and the view from Outlook Hill. You can see the controls that Ben was just talking about and keeping the part that's closest to Outlook Hill low so that it doesn't block any views of the Manhattan skyline. We don't know exactly what the buildings will look like. They haven't been designed. These are just massing studies, but the tower that you see there does represent the maximum height that's allowed in this development zone. Next. Liggett Terrace, as you come through that great arch and really enter this wonderful realm of the park, what do you see, and what's that experience going to be like? So this shows, you can see on the left the Eastern Development Zone, and on the right on the Western Development Zone. But it is important with all of these views to keep in mind that this is an ever-changing environment. The trees will grow in, and so the dashed line that you see there represents what the full height of the tree canopy will be when it grows in. We've seen some other renderings that show some of that. And so the development will be largely not visible because of the natural growth of the trees. So this is one of these primary connections that connects from the park through to the waterfront. So here you'd be looking across at the Brooklyn waterfront, near where the cruise ships will dock, and you can see some of the infrastructure there in the distance. And again, these are designed to be really extensions of the waterfront and extensions of the park, and knit those two things together. So this is what the kind of views that will create and that will sort of frame. Or all the way down at Picnic Point, when you look back towards the Manhattan skyline, you really won't see any of the development on the western side. The sort of beginnings of the hills really obscure that. You'll be adjacent to the sort of lowest scale development just on the right of the image here. But it gives you a sense, again, of how we're trying to integrate the buildings and the open space. Really, it's a symbiotic relationship. The buildings will help to activate the open space and help provide amenities as well. Next. And this is the same view that I had pointed out earlier along King Avenue, really looking over the North Island, the historic buildings that you see immediately on the left and right, and the extension of King Avenue that becomes one of these primary connections heading towards the Oval, leading people through the development and into the park beyond. Another question that we had gotten was about the esplanades and the expansion that we've done with esplanades and how we arrived at that number. So you see here on the top row what the section, the sort of profile of the existing esplanades on the west and on the east side of the island. And then below that, what the proposal is. So the western esplanade really gets tripled in size because it really is too small now. So that, as I mentioned before, it's very generous public space, also allows for the kind of potential grade transitions or other resiliency strategies. You can see in this section a sort of suggestion of a set of steps and ramps that would go up to an upper esplanade. That's one approach to resiliency, but we're leaving it open because resiliency is a quickly changing area of design. And then on the East Esplanade, which is already fairly generous, just a slight expansion to that. Go ahead to the next. Just as some reference points for that, so the Esplanade that Cornell Tech has is that same 75 feet. So that's a reasonably good model or approximation of what we would have for the Western Esplanade. And on the East River Esplanade, is today 50 feet. And so if you think of the FDR as being the beginning of the development, that gives you a sense of what that space is like. Go to the next. And just some images for anyone who's not familiar with those, or to refresh people's memories of what that kind of spatial experience is like in those areas. East River Esplanade, like the Eastern Esplanade on Governor's Island, is a slightly more sort of urban environment where there's more development next to it, and like Cornell Tech on the western side. That's it's important. More isn't necessarily better. An esplanade can get too big and feel unwelcoming and kind of desolate. And so a couple of examples, again, in both the sort of more urban environment and a slightly less urban environment, of what that might feel like and what we're trying to avoid in sizing this. It is a bit of an art form and not an exact science, but based on these precedents, we think we're in the right at the right number. A similar kind of question about Yankee Pier Plaza and what that space is like. Next. So just as a comparison, Yankee Pier Plaza will be twice the size that Swassons Landing is today. We also envision that as a landscape space, a space you'd actually want to hang out in and can really act as a gateway, as well as a place where lots of ferry riders will transition, arriving to and from the island. Go to the next. And just to give CB1, a reference point that I'm sure you'll be familiar with, this area that we've set aside for Yankee Pier Plaza is pretty much the same area as Zuccotti Park. Again, something that provides a really wonderful kind of gathering space, a bit of green space in Lower Manhattan.
It's a zoo.
I'm sorry? So just as the overall area is very similar to Zuccotti Park. So here on screen, I don't know, Claire, if you want to take this is a series of some of the other questions that we've heard.
Yes, thanks, Jack. A few other questions have come up in the past couple of sessions that we just wanted to make sure to address so you all wouldn't have to ask them again. Will development take Parkaway? No. The rezoning creates that open space sub area, and in fact, it spans the amount of open space, but none of the open space that is there today would be impacted or be taken away. Some folks have asked whether there could be a casino when the deed restrictions expire. No, casinos are not allowed under the proposed rezoning, in addition to not being allowed under the deed. Somebody asked about infill development. Obviously, this has come up a lot for this board in light of some of the conversation around East River. Infill is not being proposed. It would also require its own whole slew of approvals, including another ULURP. How many buildings at the maximum height could be built? The way the zoning works, which Ben walked through today, is that each parcel has a bunch of rules for the area above 125 feet, which include lot coverage and then capping of floor plate sizes, and finally minimum distance between buildings. And then a question about whether a developer in the future could turn the whole island residential. The answer to that question is also no. The amount of residential FAR is actually being decreased by about 60%. And so if somebody in the future, 40 years hence, wanted to come and turn the whole island into, private residential, they would have to go and do a ULURP and apply for another rezoning. Hold on while I click forward. In terms of next steps, we are almost there. Last two slides. Thank you all for working with us. As I mentioned, just a recap of timeline. We'll be going through the remainder this process, working with you all, and then the other steps in the ULURP over the course of the winter. And then at some point next year, we'll be releasing a solicitation looking for that anchor tenant for Climate Solutions Center. And to help, inform that process, the RFP design, we have been working with our CAC and other volunteers to talk about the RFP goals. We actually had a first session a couple of weeks back, and we're going to be creating 3 sort of working groups within that larger group, specifically focused around the areas of public engagement, equitable education and job pipelines, and then third, design guidelines. So there's going to be more opportunity to have input on not just what the zoning says, but also what that future RFP will say. So with that, thank you. I'm going to stop the slideshow, although we have all of these that we can pull back up at any moment. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have the slides from previous presentations at the ready, so that way, if folks have detailed questions about any portion of the presentation, we'll be ready to answer them. And again, thank you for listening to this. We wanted to make sure to answer all the questions, put all the information forward so the community board and the public have full transparency and are able to comment and ask questions through the course of the evening.
Great. Thank you, Claire and team. I know we have a lot of hands up. We'll be taking questions. Hopefully the plan is to try and limit questions to 2 or 3 questions. We will take questions from the board first. Please try to, limit your questions to 2 or 3, because I know there are a lot of people online and would like to, to speak up. So, Diana, can you help me here and let me see which board members were up? We'll start with the board members first, and then we'll go to the general public. Also, for members of the public, if you have not signed up to speak, you will need to do so, and there's a link in the chat window for you to do that. Okay, so I see Colin Mahoney. Colin, your hand was up, so we'll start with you.
Thanks, Fern. And just a couple of questions and a comment, and then I'll shut up after that. But thanks again for being here. This has been really informative. My first question, and this might have been pointed at my question I had for you a couple of months back about residential buildings. You're saying now the whole island was a concern for residential. I don't remember that being a concern. I remember the concern being any residential development on the island, as opposed to, and I'm quoting you, hotel and dormitories only. Maybe I missed a meeting, but where did I get the change from no residential to only some residential? My second question is, are you counting walkways, pathways, and roads as open space as opposed to green space, which is a concern of mine? And my comment, and I'll leave you to answer all these, is someone who's been dedicated to climate change and renewables for 15 years now. I feel like the development of this island would far offset any climate institute, any efforts you have for classrooms for climate. The resiliency alone would cause tremendous problems for the island. And construction, the gasoline, the fuel used, all of it contributes greatly to the climate crisis. So I'm very curious as to how you'd offset that. Thank you.
Sure. Colin, I'm going to try to respond to the residential question, but please jump in if I don't get it right. The nothing has changed about what we were talking about previously. It remains the case that no permanent residential is allowed anywhere on the island. However, there was concern about whether there was a loophole there because of the 3 FAR, up to 0.5 of it could be residential zoning. That would allow for things like faculty housing. But it would not allow for condos or, standard leased apartments or something like this. So we just wanted to make sure tonight to answer the question that came up. I don't remember how many meetings ago, but folks were like, oh gosh, when the deed restriction burns off in 2062. I'm sorry, could I request other folks? There's just some background noise.
Daniel, can you mute everybody? Well, not everybody.
So we just wanted to make sure to address that specific question. In 2062, when the deed restriction burns out, now you'll be released, you'll be able to do it. But the answer to that question is no, because we've actually not just can we not do residential because of the deed, we're actually reducing the amount of zoning FAR attributable to resi as well. Did that, Colin, get it?
It does. It seems a bit contradictory to the presentation we just saw, but I'm happy to take that answer for now, but I'll certainly be dogged on it in the future. Would love to hear the answer to the second question about how you're actually defining open space versus green space.
Yeah, was getting to that. Just wanted to make sure I checked the box on number 1. 2, yes, the paths, paths are counted as open space. We count them that way for the North Island as well as the South Island, just like the Esplanade itself. It may have some portions that are grassy and some portions that are permeable pavers or paved, but we count that as open space as well. We're not calling it park, obviously, but non-building footprinted areas.
Yep. And finally, I'm sure someone who's smarter than I am, maybe at Columbia, at the Earth Institute, could do some sort of study as to the economic and climate impact of this project. How on earth are you going to offset it? And I saw someone ask questions about solar and wind power. First of all, there is not wind regime on the island to even support even a public bathroom, never mind a set of buildings. Second of all, again, this is what I do. If you were to you'd have to cover the island in solar panels to actually power the island with solar power. So obviously you're going to need to draw power from somewhere. So how are you going to offset not just that, but also the climate impact of the actual construction, which I'm assuming would take years?
That is part of the process that we're working on through those design guidelines for the RFP. It's something we're working on at the Trust for now. You're absolutely right about the wind power. There's a slide in the appendix which we could pull up if helpful, but it's about both generating as much power, sustainable power, renewable power as possible for the development, but it's also about bringing down the energy consumption of those buildings. And so we have some proposals around that as well. But I think that the real thrust of what we're going to have to do is through the RFP process, describe to potential partners exactly what we're expecting in terms of performance criteria, because we're not going to be the ones designing the buildings, but then they can respond to that in terms of their proposed development plan. And it may be possible also to, harness some geothermal power or other things. But I agree that wind's not going to get it done.
One thought, and I'll let you go, but peaker power is a big thing, as is utility scale storage. I would urge you to look into that as well. I have lots more questions, but I see Alice's hand raised, and I'd really like to hear from her.
So Alice is up next, and then Rosa, Vicky, Susan, and I think Andrew, you may have or may not have your hand raised, but Alice, you're up, then Rosa, Vicky, Susan, and possibly Andrew.
Awfully fine, kind of you, Colin. I just wanted to say I thought that was an extraordinary presentation. I can't thank you enough. I really tremendously helpful on a lot of levels. Obviously, we all have a million questions. I guess this is the beginning. I'm just curious, under the financial information presentation by Christopher, in 2010, I guess the city spent, I think, $350 million on water and electricity infrastructure after the state left to the funding to the city. What do you assume the city will take on at this point, if anything? And if the anyway, that's one question.
Yeah,
I think I'll just do it in chapters.
I'll start and then Chris, you should jump in. The reality is that 15 million number that we get from the city on an operating basis has held constant for years now. And it is that same number in the 4-year operating budget plan. So if anything, what we face year in and year out are cuts, AKA pegs. And we haven't seen any increase in operating budget from the city because it has long been the goal to see the island create this path to financial self-sufficiency. Chris, do you have any qualifications to that or additions?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think, Alice, it sounded like you were also asking about our capital plan today, and we have money in our capital plan existing. Some of it we've spent on building the park and doing the kind of some first phase, bringing electricity to the park, to the island. We're currently building out water, sewer, and other infrastructure, but that's not going to cover everything. Even in this next 10 years, we're going to have to continue to work with the city to get additional capital dollars allocated, which is incredibly difficult right now.
Oh, Alice, you're on.
I have more questions, but we can leave that for now. It's detailed and there's so many people, I'm sure we want to speak. So on the draft EIS, can you go to slide page 42, I think it was, and let's look up the shadows for a second, if you could.
Yeah. Hold on one second, Alice. Okay.
I think somebody addressed this actually, Bruce Trigg, in the Q&A I see here in front of me. But the question is basically, you mentioned that this, of course, the wonderful idea of having this park be open every day all year round, which is a great ambition, and we certainly all hope for that. But the December slides, of course, indicate things don't look so rosy and could be kind of chilly and in shadow. Yeah, there we go. Particularly in the morning there, not so much the afternoon. So I was a little confused. What was the thinking there, that we'd have less people in the park, or it's not that significant, or what's your analysis of that?
Yeah, so, I mean, the reality is that December 21st is the worst shadow day in the city, period. Well, it is in the world because it's the solstice. So, it's not so much, and I think that's why as part of the EIS, they ask you to study and disclose sort of the average, which is really depicted here. Wesley, you should stop me if I'm wrong, because this is a sort of midpoint between the two solstices. Something more sort of within the summer months. This is particularly due to the sensitivities around parks, which is why they ask you to look at this. The best case, right? Like on a June day, June 21st, sun straight overhead, and then the worst case. So of course, across the course of the year, it's going to map between these things. But we do hope to have the park open year round. So there will be times in December when there are shadows. And as you can see across the course of the day, they obviously move, basically rotating north until at the very late afternoon, the shadows mostly angle up. Part of what the EIS looks at is, at any given point of the day, is there adjacent space that remains sunny, and what is the amount of increase that has occurred in terms of shadows. And by both those criteria, we were well under any impact threshold.
Right. Well, these certainly give one pause. And I'll just end with one under zoning, which is there was an ambition, I think it sounds like, on your part to have even more open space. You say that 70% of open space exists on the island, on the South Island, and 85% on the North Island. There's some desire to make the South Island maybe approach more to the numbers on the south, if I understood correctly. So how might you be considering, and did you look at alternatives to tip the balance more towards the 85%? And specifically, I look at lot E1. Is that considered the last one to go, even though it's the first one that's initialed? Or it just seems so troubling, its scale and how it really comes into the park. So, juts into the park. I'm just wondering, is that one that's considered? What's the order of the march here in terms of the development?
Yeah.
And the other question, which is, what alternatives do you look at to go up to the 85% like that exists on the North Island, which you mentioned?
Yeah. So the exact phasing order will be, obviously determined via the future RFP. But as a general rule, I think we've imagined, these buildings and then obviously adaptive reuse happening first. And then, if you were just going to break it down into 2 or 3, again, I'm somewhat hypothesizing that these likely would be the things folks might be interested in, followed by this and then this. Although it gets a little hard to predict because this is sort of a special and different place in and of itself. In terms of the amount of open space, I think the point Ben was really trying to highlight is that if somebody used the full 80% lot coverage, which isn't necessary, that would be the absolute worst case in terms of open space and would get you to the 70% ratio. However, it's probably extremely unlikely because as soon as you build a building in a straight line, you're going to have additional open space here, for example, and at other points when you do the different sort of even just the articulation of the facade, it would be very challenging to get to 80% lot coverage on the ground floor. But we've tried wherever possible in this presentation to present the sort of air quotes worst case. Rather, we wouldn't want to make it seem better than it could be. And so for the shadow study as well, I think that Wesley pointed this out, that the shadow study actually measures a development that's 20% larger than could happen under zoning. And so even that impacts in some respects the EIS because we'll never see shadows that extensive. They'll be, potentially 20% smaller. But the EIS asks that you do that to really be conservative and make sure that you're not in any way underestimating impact to the park or other sensitive sites on the island.
Great. Claire, I'm sorry, I couldn't see the arrow, but if you could just repeat that, it would be the west of course development that would come first, and then the ones that are along the shoreline on the east, and then, so E1 would be the last. Is that kind of the order of magnitude here?
I'm guessing.
Yeah, guessing. Okay. All right, I'm going to let it up for other people. Thanks so much again for an excellent presentation. Right.
If I can just one data point on the open space again, looking at Battery Park City, that's 39% open space there. So the open space that we have here, nearly doubles that.
But that's a really bad comparison because you're starting from considerably more green space than Battery Park City. And
we're not taking away any green space. I'm just saying if you look at other developments, Battery Park City is at the one end of the spectrum in terms of how much open space there is, and this more than doubles that. So we are off the spectrum in terms of the amount of open space.
But it's
the amount of development.
Sorry, I'll let others talk. I just don't agree.
Okay, so we'll move along. Rosa, I think you're up next, and then Vicky and Susan.
Hi, Fern. Thank you very much. So thank you all for addressing, I guess, what's been my primary concern this whole time, which is the Esplanade/Promenade. I noticed on your master plan that it was actually called the Great Promenade, and I really love that idea, and I appreciate that you're widening it, but I think it was visible on the plan, on the drawings that you showed, especially the comparison drawings. That 55 feet is still exceptionally narrow when you consider the range of uses, the variety of uses simultaneously using that sort of paved area when you talk about the pedestrians, the bicyclists, the people working for you that have those little golf carts, the little, family bike feeder car things. I don't even know what they are. When that range of uses, that's actually just not enough space. And so on the western side, I see that you have another width available that is to accommodate that and separate those uses from the pedestrians, who I guess are most likely to be injured. And you don't provide that on the east side. And I also find that the equivalency comparison of the east it's not FDR, the underside of the FDR is accessible. Is probably it's not a building that's going to be 70 tall up against it. The feeling is just completely different. It's absolutely porous on the pedestrian level. I also noticed that your primary connections have a minimum width of 60 feet. And so to me, it's a little weird that your primary connections would be wider than what's supposed to be the Esplanade or the Great Promenade. So really, what it does is that it takes what's an exceptional and singular public space, which is right beside the water, and essentially turns it into a transportation lane. That's not a lane that's not an area for park inhabitation and use. It's sort of just a way to get from point A to point B. And that would be a really big shame if that's what ended up happening there, because it is such a long length of the park. So I'm hoping that that will be able to get a little wider. The second thing was that I noticed that the maximum base height of the buildings along the South Island Park are higher than they are along the perimeter of the island. And I believe that they're at 90 feet instead of the other, the maximum base heights along the exterior. And so I was wondering what the rationale was for that. And also the setbacks are significantly less than they are. And so while I understand that that may be an issue looking at the island from off the island, when you're actually in the island, the feeling is a little oppressive, right? Because the setback is extremely minimal, and then the buildings just go, up straight high right after that. So I'd love to know the rationale for that. Third point, I'm just going to get through these really quickly, is it would be great if it mandate some publicly accessible bathrooms at grade, along with some sort of retail, like a minimum, let's say, to just throw a number out there, 50% retail that would be oriented to public park usage on the park side. I think that would be incredibly helpful and engage the park in sort of through these spaces to activate the primary and the secondary walkways that you're creating. And sorry, I have so many. Oh, and I did actually notice a quick error on your page 53, which lists E1 as having a maximum building height of 300 feet. But then I read elsewhere that it actually is 230 feet. So I just want to know, is it 300 or is it 230? Because that's obviously a huge difference.
And I might tag into what Rose is saying, because the last presentation last month was 360. So we do want to know what the building heights are.
Oh, but I think that's what the permitted obstructions.
Yeah, that's right.
And I the permitted are so, I would really, I mean, I'm guessing it's elevator bulkheads maybe for the last section. Oops, sorry. Sorry.
That's okay, Rosa.
Yeah, it's permitted obstructions, but permitted obstructions at 100% of the footprint is really large, and then 50% beyond that for the remainder seems really large. And so I think that you could work on that a little bit. I don't think, look, any developer is going to take everything that you give them and fit that space in there. So I think that it's going to be less than that is not reasonable. They'll figure out a way to use that space. So, oh, and the last thing, sorry to go with the residential FAR. You're talking about it as if you are reducing the residential FAR, but given that all of the zoning calculations are going to start with a lot size, which is 1.4 whatever square feet, your application still lists the FAR for residential as 0.5. So I know the number that you said was 715,000. That's based on your old max FAR or of 1. But if you're increasing your FAR to 2.98, then it is no longer 715 if you're going at 0.5 of the FAR, correct? So either that needs to be adjusted, or I think to address Tammy's concern, which she's brought up several times, maybe just while you're doing this application, just remove the Resi FAR. And then it doesn't matter if the deed restriction expires, it doesn't matter. The Resi option is gone. That's a concern that's dealt with. And since it's not a plan that you have in place at this moment right now, would allay a lot of concerns that we have.
Okay,
So
sure.
for probably like the whole 2 minutes, and now you're going to have to answer all of them.
There's a slide that we can bring up to address the residential question, because I'm afraid in our great desire to help clarify, we may have confused matters on that. Sarah, are you able to bring up the deck? It's hard for me to do it while answering questions. And then why don't I try and
give me 1 moment and I'll bring up the slide.
why don't I'll try to address that, Rosa, and then maybe I'll kick it over to Jack and Ben to talk about promenade and setbacks and E1 height and permitted obstructions. So on residential, it's a little bit hard to compare because today the entire southern half of the island generates FAR, including the park space. And that's the sort of status quo, but because it's one zoning lot, you can use that FAR anywhere. And so the easiest way to compare it is indeed in terms of just the actual amount of square footage that would be allowed. So today, if we didn't get a look for a rezoning, technically one could build 1.6 approximately million square feet of residential. Under the proposed rezoning, that number drops to the approximately 700,000 square feet. The reason that we can't just eliminate the 0.5 FAR of residential is there are some uses allowed by the deed, like artist residencies and faculty housing, that require the residential FAR, even though they're not condos or rental apartments. So let me pause there. Let me kick it over to Ben and Jack, and then maybe when Sarah pulls the slide up, we can come back to that question.
Yeah, and I think, Diana, I will need host privileges to pull the slide up. Thanks.
Actually, about FAR, I forgot to mention, which is critical, is we're talking about 4.275 million zoning square feet. And I want to be that the zoning square feet is really different from gross square feet, because there are a lot of deductions that you can take. And so you could end up with, well over 5 million square feet in actual development. And I just want to be clear that everybody understands that, because I know that everywhere it says what the zoning square foot is, and that's what you're limited to. But gross square foot, which is what's actually going to be built there and what you're going to see and experience, that's over 5.
I'll let maybe Ben and Jack can speak to that as well. The gross square footage, you're right, that gross square footage is higher than zoning square feet. That's absolutely the case. For example, in the EIS, the gross square footage calculated is about 4.5 million. I don't think there's any zoning rule tricks you could get to 5 million. But Jack and Ben, can you walk through Rosa's other very good questions?
Sure. So to address the maximum base heights on the slide, which is not up, there were 3 base heights listed for which one was 60 feet for buildings that front only on esplanades. But the basic height of a maximum base height across all of the parcels is 75. The one exception lies at Yankee Pier Plaza, which is intended to allow for more density adjacent to transportation. So we have 75 throughout, with, the south of W1 goes down to 50, but along the waterfront 60, and then at Yankee Pier Plaza 90. But it's really, it is 75. In terms of Esplanade widths, the 75 feet, which we're proposing on the Western Esplanade, really is, equal to the width of, say, Broadway below City Hall. It's considered a wide street within zoning. Broadway has 4 traffic lanes, wide sidewalks. Yes, it is congested, but it is filled with cars. In the way that Governor's Island operates, it does not have streets per se. So it's really kind of this idea of having kind of these mixed modal paths, which are significantly wider than the paths that exist there today. The ability on the Western to not only have the Western Esplanade, not only to have kind of open space for viewing, and then also an upper Esplanade to view over, is really intended to promote the enjoyment of the view. But it is important to just note that Esplanade width is not, that length is not the full length of the entire island, not just only within those portions where we have development. And so directly adjacent to the Western development zone, just to the south, is a larger open space area, which is really intended as a space which can be utilized as a kind of gathering space for the views towards the Statue of Liberty. To speak about some of the other kind of just widths of primary connections, a typical narrow street in New York City is 60 feet wide, and so that's the same width that we're showing for the primary connections. And the Esplanade width on the eastern side is really, the views. There's a differentiation between the Western Esplanade and the Eastern Esplanade, and we want to create a hierarchy of kind of a more promoting of a public space and the views out to the west, whereas the Eastern Esplanade is a little bit more narrow, but still sufficient to allow for the mixed modal transportation and also some, promenading along the waterfront. The grade change and anything that would happen within the development zones would really happen within the development zone. And the zoning regulation does not require any of these buildings to build up to this line. And if a building does set back from this line, that then becomes more public open space.
Right. But just assume that they're going to build up to as much line as you give them.
Well, I mean, there's many different ways to think about this, just because, there's a lot of ways to fit the 4.5 million gross or 4.275 million zoning. What we're showing in a lot of these examples were massings, illustrative massings that show the closest which somebody can build something to a public open space. Somebody might want to, set buildings back and still be able to build the same amount of floor area.
But you are not doing,
Rosa, Ben, sorry, it's Tammy. I'm going to interrupt you here just to let you both know it's 8 o'clock, and just let everybody know we have 30 public speakers who have signed up. So I want you to please wind up finishing Rosa's answer as efficiently as possible versus illustratively as possible. Okay?
Yeah.
Thanks. I apologize.
And Rosa, we hear you. The spirit of tonight is we're trying to take all the comments and questions. So Ben, just what is the facts about the setbacks and what are the facts about E1's height?
Yeah, E1 is a maximum building height of 230 feet. In the setbacks along all different, along primary connections is 15 feet. That is typical within New York City zoning. And then I think the last question was about bulkheads. It's important to note that bulkheads cannot be utilized for occupiable uses. So there is very little incentive. It's not rentable space for a developer to build and then utilize. This is space where they're going to put their equipment. And we're just providing extra height here in order to allow for a resilient location for mechanical equipment. Having worked with developers quite often, we typically want developers to screen everything. When it comes to the bulkhead, at times, they're looking to save money and not build to a maximum height, especially if it can't be rented.
I would refer you to map 4 in your own document. Show the maximum base height of the buildings as 90 feet along the entire South Park from lots E4, E3, and E1. Just to address a specific issue, and then I'm going to let it go because I know that there's a lot of people and I took way too much time, so thank you.
Rosa, can you do me a favor? Send your notes to the community board because we will make sure we get answers from Claire and Ben and the team afterwards. And thank you for bringing up one of my main concerns. I'll tag on at the end and keep going through because I don't think I heard the answer that I needed. Fern, who's next?
Vicky's up next, then Susan, I believe Laura. I think Andrew had his hand up too. So Vicky, you're up next.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire and the team. Lots of hard work, I know. I want to take my question back to sort of the beginning rather than these details. Rosa did an awesome job. For my fellow board members, designing a city or planning a community, and this really is, our last potential site to build something in New York City of significance, both architecturally, planning-wise, and experience. So, for example, New York City, is made up of a very strict geometric grid, and then we have the unbelievable Central Park with the pastoral to offset and give us a break from the grid. So that's sort of the New York City's big idea. It's called the CAR-T. And so my question is, a statement and question is, when you started to draw and design, first we dream, then we worry about whether the base wall is 75 feet and, should we use the New York City standard or not, or wide street, narrow street. And I'm troubled not just by the architecture, the architectural materials and the expression, as I mentioned before. I will say that in my experience, the renderings that I see, these buildings last no more than 35 to 50 years. So how convenient, by 2062, they'll be ready to go down. I want to know why there is no central idea. There is no CAR-T. There is no overriding strategy. We have a tremendous history, right? That we should stand on the shoulder of these giants who previously developed planned communities. And I'm not an expert in that. I think other people on this project are. But it seems to me that what you're building is just, what we call building zoning text, right? There is no hierarchy, no big plan, nothing to identify this island, this location. I don't want to, sound not mean, but, it reminds me of a suburban sprawl and malls. I don't understand. If you could help me to tell me why you didn't start with a precedent, something that has a look and a feeling. Our own city here has an overriding plan. So why don't we have a plan here?
Great. Thanks, Vicki. I think, we heard loud and clear from the community board a couple of years ago when when the idea of rezoning the southern part of the island came about, a lot of those same points. What's the idea? Why does it look, suburban? I think a lot of what we've spent our time over the past months, really the past or many months, is coming up with a defining idea that we believe could be really exciting for the island and the city, and that is the idea of a Center for Climate Solutions. And we think that we have.
That's not a plan.
Oh, just let me, Vicky, I'll come back to that. Don't worry. And so we think that really can be a source of inspiration, both to address what is going to be the pressing problem of the century, but also as a jumping off point for the designers who are actually going to be designing these buildings in the future to really respond to. And so the renderings that you've seen, whether they be the WXY ones, which we really worked very hard on to try and connote this idea of a sustainable and resilient urban environment, or the ones that FX Collaborative put together, which appeared in a little bit of the presentation today as a way to hopefully show just more of what the building massing could look like, are not the designs. And what we're going to say in the RFP is that we want the architecture on this island to be inspiring. And if we accept an architecture that looks like Anywheresville, then we've failed at the job. But the zoning can't define the architecture. And so we would really, these comments are so important. We think we have an opportunity to do something extraordinary here. It's just we're not yet at the point of designing the buildings where we can do that in terms of showing what they're going to look like. But we hope that the idea of the Center for Climate Solutions is something that is defining and will hope be a real point of inspiration for the architects who respond as part of the RFP to do something phenomenal.
Right. I agree. I mean, it's all coming, but you do not have a party, you do not have a plan, you do not have a center, you don't have anything off center, or you don't have a center, but there are many architecture and planning tools, and you're not applying any of them. It's just, like, as you said, people in the past have pointed out the same thing. This is unique, but your solution is not unique. This is a unique island. This is a terrific island. It sits in one of the greatest harbors in the world. Your solution is unique, is not unique. You keep saying that. You keep saying it's great. Someone here even mentioned the Paris Arch. I couldn't believe, thank God I was sitting down. You can't just say it. You have to do it. So please do it. Like, just understand there are people in the city. It's not just a public project. But we would like something great, and we don't want to be obsessed with financials and a climate center and all that. So we want something that starts great, and then the little stuff fits into it. You know what I'm talking about. People who design know what I'm talking about.
Thanks, Vicki.
Thank you.
Susan, you're up next.
Thanks. Very quickly, Rosa. I don't think it's me, but I don't know. Very quick, Rosa answered lots of the questions.
Susan, is it possible that you have the meeting on maybe on a phone device and your computer?
No.
She's logged in twice.
Maybe I'm logged in twice. I'll log out very quickly.
Come back to Susan.
Can we, Susan, we'll get back to you. Laura, can you can go ahead and ask your question while we're getting Susan set up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everybody for the really wonderful presentation. I agree with a lot of the comments. I wanted to add a few things. Governor's Island to me is this like magical, verdant place. And I think the question is like, how can this development support that? Like what is the magic of a day on Governor's Island? And how do those ground floor uses and the building walls that face the park really support that? Is there some modern version of the St. Anne's Warehouse and, some real cultural anchors there that just add to this like climate, this green immersive experience? I agree with a lot of Rosa's points. I disagree about the width of the promenade, Rosa. I think that the promenade is 20 wide, what they're proposing, and it should not be wider. Because it's a very urban space. And I think that we want to, save as much of the open space for really like immersive, green, biodiverse space as possible. As landscape architects, we've been working on a lot of green buildings and with a lot of ecologists. And one thing about climate solutions is that biodiversity can happen on the ground and then on the second floor, on the third floor, on the setbacks, and all the way up. So I don't know if there's a way to add into the zoning this opportunity to really create pockets of green all the way up so that the buildings are just armatures for these climate solutions and the biodiversity. Those are my comments, and you don't even have to answer them. So next, thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Susan, are you able to speak?
Yeah, I am able to speak.
Okay.
Thank you
There you
very
go.
much. And thank you for the presentation. I just want to get it in my head. Does it mean that in what I consider 5 developments, 4 and 1 on the western, you can go as high as 30 feet? 30 stories. I just want to put it in my vision so I have an understanding of what's going to go there.
Yes, thank you,
36
Susan.
with the setback.
Well, so for the 5 development zones, there are 2 with a height limit of 200 feet, which I guess you could fit 20 stories. That would be very aggressive for commercial use, almost impossible. I think we could all speculate, but that would be the upper limit.
I got
2
it.
of the parcels would be 300. So again, the same caveat. And then 1 is 230.
Okay.
And as Tammy's alluding to, the parcels allow for permitted obstructions above and beyond that, where you can put things like elevator heads, cooling towers, basically mechanical equipment only.
Thanks. Everybody, all of them have said what I need to say, so I just wanted to get that in my head. Thank you.
Thanks,
Very
Susan.
much, Claire.
Andrew, did you have your hand up?
I did. Thanks so much. And I'll be hopefully quick because most of my statement is a comment. First of all, Claire and team, thanks so much for your continued engagement with the community. I think what's transpired recently and what will happen going forward will hopefully get us to a spot where we have this magical place that everyone's referring to. I missed the first part of the meeting, and I understand financials were brought up there, and I'm sure the point was made repeatedly that one of the key triggers for this is creating a long-term sustainable revenue stream for the trust and the island. And I just want to point out, I know a lot of people on this call are aware that this is not unique to Governor's Island. A number of people on this call have been involved for probably more than a decade addressing this very same issue with Hudson River Park Trust. And I think the collaboration with the trust and the 3 community boards, being 1, 2, and 4, have really resulted in a spectacular facility and trying to strike that balance, the appropriate balance between commercial activity and park space. And I can tell you over those 10 years, it's probably been stated repeatedly and aggressively that New York City Park should not be dependent upon revenues coming from commercial activity. And while I think every person that's been involved would agree with that, I think the unfortunate reality is that asking for the city and state to continue to fund in full is just not going to be the solution to this problem. And again, I know a number of people are aware of that. The other quick comment I wanted to make, and I know this isn't the objective of the meeting, and it's probably part of your planning, but with the revenue that will come from a project such as this, I think it's important to spend some time ensuring that community input helps drive what will happen on the other parts of the island in terms of creating this magical place. And I'm just going to make a quick plug. When we look at Battery Park City and Hudson River Park, they offer significant space and facilities for bringing the community out around youth sports activities. And I think there are few activities that bring a community out, such as watching their children play in organized sports. And I know Governor's Island has significant footprint currently, but it's just not configured in such a way that it's as functional or as usable as what we see in other neighboring parks. So we can put a placeholder on that, but it's something I'd like to be able to work with you on going forward. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Hear all that. And I would just underscore the one point Andrew alluded to, which is that, as we move forward, whether it be with this rezoning or, the addition of recreational fields or play spaces or whatever, we're absolutely committed to working with this community board and other members of the public on how those are configured and what are the uses that best sort of meet the needs of our use group.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions from the public. I just had one question that I'd like to understand a little bit better, and then I'll turn it over to Tammy to wrap it up before we go to the public comments. I guess what I found most confusing was that it surprised me that no one was aware of the variance in the zoning, until very, very recently, that this could become residential at some point. So I think that's what I found confusing. That may have been, it seemed to have taken everybody by surprise. So I guess the question I have, is there anything else that we, when you don't know what to ask, you don't know what to ask. And I'm the least experienced person here, so I have no idea. How would we know if there is another situation that we think is fine? What else could possibly change in the next, 40 years?
I think, Claire, you're muted.
Oh. Am I now unmuted? Oh, someone unmuted me. Wow. Thanks, Diana. Okay. So, no, I don't think there's anything else. And, it was, I had a conversation with Tammy however long ago it was, where I was like, here's this, we're going to come and make sure you guys understand this. So that's an exercise that we went through very carefully to make sure that there, are no surprises. It's probably why that presentation was upwards of an hour and a half. So thank you all for bearing with us, was in the spirit of making sure that all the information was on the table. I really do just want to underscore again the main point, which is that even when the deed restriction burns off, if somebody wanted to turn all this into residential, there would have to be another ULURP. So, of all things for folks to leave tonight thinking, I, again, just want to make sure that that's clear, because the amount of residential zoning being asked for in this is 1/6 of the total FAR, and is really what we thought was the bare minimum necessary to realize the climate solutions vision. And that anyone who wanted to go above and beyond that would, as I said, have to come and pursue another rezoning in the 40-year time period, at the end of the 40-year time period.
And Claire, before we move on to Amy, I just want to correct, I misspoke when I was speaking to Rosa Chang. She is correct that we are permitting a 90-foot base height along the eastern development zone adjacent to Yankee Pier Plaza and the park open space. And this really was intended in order to kind of frame the park view. And the 90 feet is just taller than the tops of tree canopy, and it will create a cornice line if it is built to. That will help to frame the park, and that was the intention behind that decision. And I apologize for misspeaking before.
So I just want to build on what Fern said, Claire. Mm-hmm. You keep saying that the entire island won't be residential. We understand that, but there is a large residential component that is available once the deed restriction. So if you look at it from a usage point of what's perspective, I'm looking and saying, well, mm-hmm. what we are turning a public asset and amenity to is luxury hotels, high-end condos, which are available, a spa, educational use, which we hope it's educational, but there is nothing in there that says it couldn't be, as you and I have discussed on the last call. Amazon decides they're going to open up a climate change educational center. They could do that. So what we're looking, this is why I want to frame it very carefully. The answer keeps coming back, well, it can't be all residential. We understand that, but what I'm looking at is the overall perspective of what the change could look like in 40 years based on the zoning that you're asking for, based on the deed restrictions going away, and understanding how that fits into an overall vision for what Governor's Island is. I'm not talking about many other things, but one of the things that I had asked for was if there was a lower density and lower development, how much longer would it take to be fiscally solvent? I didn't see that modeling in what you're showing us, right? I didn't see any of that. I had some, some questions on the fiscal stuff, but I think it may be easier to write that to you afterwards because the fiscal modeling seemed a little, I had many questions on it, so we can go over that later. And then the other question is, the community as a whole has an experience with other development sites where people have said to us that paths and esplanades are open space. When the community thinks of open space, we think of much like what Andrew's saying. We think of public usage, not walkways, I don't know many people who think the bikeway is a valued greenway in Manhattan, and it is technically open space because you can ride on it, but it is not what one thinks of as parkland. Right? So when you're adding the esplanades, which will potentially have bikeways, pedestrian ways, a trolleyway, because you've spoken about trolleys going around the perimeter of the island, that ceases to become, in my expectation, of what open space is and really is passageway, which I don't necessarily think is a fair vision for the general public to understand open space. It keeps being added back into the things as, look, we're now 80% open space. But I keep looking saying the numbers are really not based that way because other than pathway, there's not really a usage. There's not a tennis court, it's not a handball court, it's not a playground, it's a walkway in between buildings. And so I have a struggle with the presentation every time we hear it because I think that it's not accurately representing what a public user experience is. It may be very good architecture talk, apologies, and very good presentation talks, but I don't find it user friendly in terms of the general public and feedback. So I would like to see, and maybe you can come back to us and show us what the real numbers look like without the looping transportation ring that's called the Esplanade around the ends. And the comparison back to Battery Park City, I will tell you from being a resident down here for 25 years, the one with the growth and build out of Battery Park City, one of the hardest things I would say is probably least successful is the far, far, far competitive uses of the Esplanade. And on a very busy day, especially during COVID, there's no such thing as social distancing. It's hard to enjoy being on a bench there when you've got bicycles running by and things like that. So it might not have been your best choice of an example back there, just kind of tagging to that. And then when the deed restrictions go away, what part of that the allowed usage are input into your fiscal modeling. Again, if you can let me know that later, that's fine. And then I'm curious about the revenues and everything you noted on the ferry. Currently in New York City, the ferries are the highest subsidized form of transportation in New York City. It's upwards of, I've seen some articles that say $24 a ride. So I'm curious as to where your income and expenses go, how that is termed to be a positive. And then for tax revenue, it does seem to me that based on the fiscal modeling and the development plans, that it actually would be more beneficial to the island to have commercial versus educational, because you would have a greater tax revenue for the city and things like that. So is there a modeling percentage that you are guaranteeing that's going to be educational, held for educational, not for profit? Or is this just kind of the baseline of what you have? And if corporate took it all because you're going to get more taxes and more revenue, that would still be okay? Because we're looking, I'm looking at what we're shown as potentials and what is actually allowed and potentially reality in the long run. Not that business is bad. Business is not bad. We want everybody to come back and we want everybody to be positive, but we want to understand the usage on the island and what that would look like. And then I'm going to call on the public. We have 30 people who have their hands up.
Great. Thanks, Tammy. On your first point about residential, just to clarify, I guess, yes, that is true. It would not be not the whole island that's residential. To be very, very precise, of the proposed rezoning of the South Island, a maximum of 1/6 of it, whatever that is, 18%. If I got that wrong, hopefully a math genius here will give me a little bit of a grain of salt with that, could be filed as residential. Again, we're 100% committed to the climate solutions vision that we've laid out, which means putting out an RFP for an educational research anchor. The way we'd imagine that residential quote unquote FAR being used in the next few decades is as faculty housing, artist residencies, and some of the caretaker housing, et cetera, some of the other uses that Sarah had pulled up earlier, cannot be used for condos or apartment rentals, nor would that be the intent. But again, Tammy, just to be super precise, way, way less than the whole island. The max of this proposed South Island rezoning is, I think, 17 or 18%, whatever 1/6 is. Ferry revenue, we show that both in the expense bucket and the revenue bucket. You're right, it absolutely does not make money, but in our pie chart or in our future projections, like in today's dollars, 2020, costs us about $5 million a year to run all of our transportation services, which are obviously all ferry. We make about $600,000 in ticket revenue. And, we remain dedicated to keeping those free fare categories and in fact expanded them this past year. So no, it's not a revenue generator, but we report the ferry revenue above the line and then show the expenses below it. The guarantee of educational, again, tonight, I think the purpose of tonight is really to take all the comments and concerns. I hear that actually the deed does require a certain acreage be used as educational, just as it requires that a certain acreage be used as park. But that is, a different answer than the zoning one, which I hear you asking. And then in-ray speed of development, let me see if I can just pull up. Diana, would you mind allowing me to be the presenter again? Sure.
Sure, I can. Go back to your financial slides. Chris went through. Okay, there we go. Okay, so Tammy, I'm going to bring up a slide here. Okay. Okay, so basically this shows the speed question, is really tricky to answer because that's really dictated just by how long lease up takes. But I think that, whether it's 20 years or 21 years or 22 years, the big question is, what's the most you need to reach financial self-sufficiency? And so there is a slight overrun that's projected here. Like you do see that revenue exceeds expenses in that break-even year 2050, the 30-year pro forma. That is a little bit of cushion, honestly. If we totally eliminated cushion, had 0% cushion, it would look like a few 100,000 square feet less of development. About 10%. It causes us some fear to do that because, some amount of contingency in a budget probably makes sense. And as Chris highlighted, the part here that's the sort of overrun is the stuff that's really hard to count on. It's like a lot of grant support and fundraising support. But that is the technical answer to the question. It's a few 100,000 square feet to get to exactly break even.
Gotcha. All righty. If you are,
Could I just respond to the comment about Battery Park City and Esplanade? Tammy, I 100% agree with you. The Esplanade and Battery Park City is too narrow, but it's only about 20 or 25 feet. The Esplanades that we're talking about are at least double, triple that. I've spent all spring taking my kids to Rockefeller Park to play every day. I know what that was like. I know how crowded it got, and I completely agree with you. But I think we really have paid attention to the dimensions here and the precedents. Battery Park City was only brought up as a precedent about how the buildings and the open space interact.
Oh, Jack, thank you for that. I missed one of your questions, Tammy. We can definitely rerun the calculations and exclude Esplanade. I would note that there's a few things that are in there that are sort of not connector spaces. There's two big parts of actual new park space, and then there's Yankee Pier Plaza. But we can certainly rerun the calcs without those things.
you know, you understand my point. Basically, anywhere that a person would consider it a park or not consider it a park. Are you sitting down and playing chess there at a chess table like you are in City Hall Park, or is it just the thoroughfare walking through?
Yes. Did you just watch Queen's Gambit?
Alrighty.
And I would just add, Tammy, you know, the Yankee Pier Plaza and then the unbuilt portions of the park that were outlined by the master plan. I know in one of the renderings that we did, we show kind of a wetlands area that could be an educational space. I think those are real opportunities for us to hear feedback from the community on what they'd like to see out of newly created open space. So that's something that we are committed to continuing to engage with you all on.
Well, thank you for that perfect segue. I'm going to go to Janine Kiley and the public. So if I could have everybody else stay on mute, and then Janine, we're going to unmute you. Your mic is now open. Thank you, Janine.
Hi. Sorry. Just a moment. Sorry.
It's okay. While you're getting ready, I'll tell the next three people.
Okay. Sorry.
You ready? It's going to be Janine, and then Merritt, and then Gerald. So Janine, take it away.
Hi, my name is Janine Kiley. I'm a downtown Democratic district leader, and I'm also here. I'm part of Pier 40 Champions. It's an initiative that advocates for more field space for youth sports in downtown Manhattan. And we advocate on behalf of the more than 12,500 children who participate in our youth sports programs. I want to highlight the obvious, that there's been tremendous growth in the youth population downtown, but the city has added very few fields, the most recent additions being the 2 grass fields on Governor's Island. As you all know, since 2000, public K-8 enrollment in Community Board 1 is through the roof. It's up 251%. And today in Community Boards 1, 2, and 3, there are more than 40,000 students attending of 104 public, charter, and private elementary, middle, and high schools. Meanwhile, access to field space remains one of the biggest obstacles to youth sports, particularly at the high school level. And I want to highlight that downtown, there are 40 high schools, including the Harbor School on Governor's Island. In light of this huge need and the expected near-term loss of 8 fields in East River Park, I urge Community Board 1, Borough President Brewer, and Councilmember Chin to ensure that additional sports fields are part of any rezoning plan for Governor's Island. Specifically, 1, significantly increase the use of the existing 2 fields by adding artificial turf and lights, and 2, create additional fields on Governor's Island. Thank you.
Dang, Janine, that was fast. Claire?
Yes, thank you. I think Andrew also spoke to the need of sports fields, and you know, we're happy to take all that under consideration. I think, you know, some parts of that are more challenging than others. You know, I think one of the beautiful things about Governor's Island is the expanse of real grass. But I totally hear you on making better use of the space that's there today. And there are also areas of the park that, existing park, that we think could be put to good use as additional field space.
I think even if you ended up with the setbacks that were only 3 stories tall and you could put a soccer field on top of one side, you know, nobody's going to say that that would be a bad thought either. All All right, from Janine, we're going to Merritt Birnbaum. Merritt? Merritt?
Thank you. Hi. Yeah, I would like to also do my presentation with Rob Pirani to save a little bit of time. So we have a joint statement from the Friends of Governors Island, and we'll try to do this quickly for everyone. You know, I mentioned on the last call, the Friends of Governors Island is an independent nonprofit that works to ensure the island's continued growth and accessibility as a vibrant public resource. We're the fundraising partner of the Trust for Governors Island, and our mission is to steward the green spaces, enhance the visitor experience, and build a community dedicated to the island's future. Our primary goal is to support public access to and increased enjoyment of this extraordinary place. And I'd like to ask Rob to give a little bit of background history as the first founding executive director of the Alliance.
Thanks, Merritt, and thanks to all of you on the community board and obviously the trust for your diligence and working through this challenge and that's posed by the rezoning and the effort that's gone into it. When the organization was founded back in 1996, you know, the folks in the Governor's Island Alliance, including Community Board 1 at the time, really saw the military base as being a great civic resource for the city. You know, dominated by parkland and informed by that parkland, but something that always had a mix of uses that sort of were there in the service of public use and public benefit. It's something that we worked hard on to get into the deed restrictions, and it's something that we felt was critical. You know, obviously, it's important that revenue gets generated out on the island to help support its use, and I'd emphasize support that goes to the island, not to the general city fund. But it's also something that drives public enjoyment, you know, throughout the year on rainy days as well as sunny days, and something that supports all of the great amenities that are out there now.
So we wanted to give an overview just of 2 points that are very important to our organization, both of which have been talked about today, but really speaking to financial sustainability. You know, this has come up in all the modeling that Claire and her team presented, but unlike a typical park, Governor's Island, you know, we've talked about Hudson River Park and other parks, it necessitates expenditures that go way beyond ground maintenance and security. The trust is wholly responsible for running, among other things, a public transportation network, a public utilities system, public marine infrastructure, public facilities maintenance, and public parkland. And access to the park and these other amenities on Governor's Island is not possible without all of the other mentioned ancillary services. And those services cannot be delivered without significant revenue, as they are extremely costly. So despite the progress over the last decade and the current revenue of $20 million that's supporting the trust, it still is barely enough for the island to be a seasonal destination. You know, as Rob said, we've always supported development on the island, reasonable mixed-use development that's responsible and responding to the public need. And we have 25 years of experience with this, so we've seen firsthand the benefits of vibrant mixed-use activity that can attract and delight visitors beyond just the park space itself. And then as the primary fundraiser for the island, bringing in private philanthropy,
Merritt, you're going to have to wind up. Thank you. Sorry.
No, just the main point, and I made this the last time, and I'll submit the written testimony for you, which is, you know, other parks raise the majority of their private funding from people who live within 2 blocks of the park, and we're not adjacent to any neighborhood. Of the Friends' $1.75 million budget, less than 10% comes from individual donors, and the vast majority of it is tied to corporations and events. And the pandemic has really shown the instability of these sources, and we now face potential revenue losses of up to 75%. So again, just to underscore that the revenues generated from rent and other development activities that are much more sizable are stable and increasingly necessary to support the island as a year-round destination.
Thank you, Merritt, very much. I'm going to go next to Gerald Forsberg. Gerald, your mic is open.
Yeah, hi, Tammy. I'm going to try to keep this very short. I understand there's a lot of folks in line here. So what I keep hearing this evening, and what my concern is a need for transparency. I think Fern mentioned this earlier. A few others have mentioned it, but on an administrative level, for example, I signed up for emails from the trust over 3 years ago. I've never received one email yet. I've signed up repeatedly and not received emails. The RFPs are nowhere available on the website, as far as I can tell. I have to actually go out and Google Governors Trust RFP. It's not under the About site. So transparency being one thing. The other thing is, in regards to transparency, I still do not understand the requests. What is causing the request for the zoning? I understand there's a financial component to foot the bills for the island. However, at the end of the day, there's a whole North Island that hasn't been developed yet. There are buildings that are sitting vacant. I haven't heard anything further about that. And there's a zoning request that's coming on the table that's going to have countless unintended consequences from what it seems like, because there isn't really a driving factor other than this climate resource center. I think it's a great idea. I think that there's a lot of unique possibilities here. Again, everybody hears about the uniqueness of the island, but what exactly, how is the trust seeing the uniqueness? We want to hear that from the trust. Tell us what you see, what you hear the public saying is unique about the island. And I guess the last comment I would make with all of this is that the pandemic has shown the necessity of not just open space, but green space. We definitely need green space. I'm stuck in an apartment, working from home, as are many of my colleagues. And the folks that have been here and rode this out through the pandemic since March 17th, when everything locked down, we need outdoor spaces. We need green space. We need trees. We need the birds and all the rest of it that come with it. If there's a way to, capitalize on that, hey, it's America. Let's do it. But we need green spaces, not rezoning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Claire, do you have anything you want to add to that? You're muted.
We will make sure that, Gerald, thank you so much. We'll make sure you get emails. That's obviously not something we want. The RFPs have not yet been released, but they will absolutely be a public process once they are. We do have some RFPs on our website today. They are for buildings on the North Island. Last week we spent a lot of time talking about the North Island redevelopment plans. As Chris alluded to tonight, they are a core part of the strategy here for the island going forward, is to see those buildings adaptively reused, and it's something we work on yesterday, today, and we'll continue to work on tomorrow. So thank you for all of that.
Thank you. Karen Imus, are you still on?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Great. Karen, you're next. Before you start, though, let me find the next person after you so we know. Dr. Bruce Trigg will be after Karen, and then Roger Manning. Okay, Karen, take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm Karen Imus, Vice President of Programs at Waterfront Alliance. As many of you know, we're a nonprofit civic organization and coalition of more than 1,100 Alliance partners, and our mission is to inspire and enable resilient, revitalized, and accessible coastlines for all communities. Governor's Island is one of the pearls of New York Harbor, and its ongoing transformation into a public space has been critical for restoring New Yorkers' connection with their waterfront. And we recognize that a proposed development is needed to support the ongoing maintenance of the park, public spaces, and historic buildings on the North Island. In this statement, we offer some comments to strengthen the proposal with respect to resilience and design, and to integrate certain standards and requirements into the yet to be issued RFP. These are abridged comments, and a longer testimony has been submitted. Through a maritime activation plan published by Waterfront Alliance in 2019, we presented a set of recommendations capitalizing on the island's unique waterfront assets, and we're heartened to see many of these reflected in the trust application. This includes a focus on increasing passage and density to Yankee Pier as the island works towards full year operation. And additionally, we recommended reconstructing Lima Pier for use as the designated service or freight entrance to the island. Separately, through the lens of our waterfront edge design guidelines, which is a verification system for resilience, public access, and innovation at the water's edge, we have some comments about adaptation strategies and ecological features in this proposal. And last year, this community board actually adopted a resolution encouraging all waterfront ULURP applicants to adopt wedge standards. And we strongly encourage the project team to work with Waterfront Alliance through our wedge process to meet this commitment. So with respect to the resilience and adaptation strategies in this proposal, resiliency is obviously a key consideration. Both development zones are in a portion of the island that was created with fill material and within the 100-year floodplain. And in the trust presentations, the design flood elevation varies between 13 and 15 feet above the base flood elevation. And we would want to see those elevation strategies up to 17 feet and 18 feet. The reason being, introducing dormitories, even if temporary housing, into a complicated floodplain merits a more conservative approach for design flood elevation, as well as, of course, comprehensive strategy for preparedness. With respect to the operations and focus of the proposed climate center, we recommend consideration of a request for expressions of interest before the RFP process. The higher ed sector has obviously changed substantially with COVID-19 and will likely continue to look different in the future with more remote learning opportunities. And while we agree that a climate research center would be an asset to the island and to the city, we believe more information should be gathered about viable interest from academic and research partners, as well as how this might affect the scale of a proposed project and its economic viability. With respect to the design for the perimeter around the South Island, we encourage breaking down barriers between water and land with ecological approaches. This creates living laboratories, recreational opportunities, and resilience buffers. But we also anticipate the limits of the waterfront edge on Governor's Island. For example, while we encourage greater use of natural shorelines in the design, the currents surrounding the island and its hard edge may eliminate, for example, the development of wetlands areas or other fragile green infrastructure. And we recommend a thorough engineering analysis of the hard edge and possibilities for living shorelines. This may in turn really influence the attractiveness of this site to a climate research institution. Finally, we look forward to connecting with the Trust and the Community Board to ensure the ongoing success of Governor's Island and a viable future for this project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And if you can send us the written what you read, we'd appreciate it. You can send it straight to the Community Board. Okay, next. My pleasure. Clara, anything you want to add back?
No, just thank you, Karen. I think these questions, particularly around the design flood elevation, are exactly the right ones as we begin drafting the whatever the form this solicitation takes next year, RFEI, RFP, as well as the considerations around the water's edge. So thank you.
Perfect. Dr. Bruce Trigg, please.
Yeah, good evening. I'm a public health physician. I live in the West Village, and public land use is a public health issue, and I would like to see public health experts in that issue be involved in future plans. I think this one should be dead in the water. New Yorkers need open space for our physical health and our mental health, has already been mentioned, especially during COVID. I want to say that I don't understand why this rushed process is happening now in the midst of the worst pandemic in 100 chaotic election in American history. This really has a feeling of being rushed to me, and it makes real public transparency impossible. I mean, the media should be covering this. There should be public meetings. I suggest that this whole process be put off for at least a year. What is the rush? It really has a feeling that this is being done so it's a fait accompli. I urge the Community Board, and I want to thank the Community Board for your public service, but I urge you to nip this in the bud and turn down this plan, which is essentially to destroy the park in order to protect the park. And I have to say, there's some irony in realizing that everyone here knows that as soon as this space became public, all the developers were immediately chomping at the bit to build luxury hotels and luxury resorts. And that's actually what we're getting now under the guise of protecting the park. I think that the trustees should go back to the drawing board and figure out other ways of funding our public park and not privatizing it. The amounts of money that it actually is needed is, I have to say, it's a rounding error for Wall Street and for even for our city government. New York City and state put $6 billion, that's the estimate, into the Hudson Yards. And they offered Amazon $3 billion. So the amount of money we're talking about to keep this island in its pristine, healthy state in perpetuity is really trivial. So, I mean, I really think other options for funding, including pressuring our city. But again, no decisions can be made until after COVID. Everyone's future and this future of the city and of real estate is obviously up in the air. So why are we rushing this? I don't know what the rules are, but I just don't see the purpose of making this zoning change in essentially in a time that it's really outside of public purview. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Trigg. If you would like to submit comment, take a look in the chat or email your thoughts to Community Board 1 as well. Claire?
Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Bruce. I would just say your comments are appreciated. We've been working on this for many years, obviously, but we've been working on this for many years and have put a lot of hard work into coming up with a proposal that we think will help ensure the future of Governor's Island as a public resource.
Okay, we're going to move to Roger Manning. He's next. And then after Roger, we're going to go to Jacqueline and Tiffany Winbush.
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Roger. Yes, Roger, we can.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Governor's Island's been a one-of-a-kind open space experience for visitors, thanks mostly to the really thoughtful development so far, by the people working on it. Thanks for that. And this plan, obviously a lot of work and thought put into it, but it essentially urbanizes Governor's Island. I mean, comparisons to of future public spaces, the County Park and the resulting building shadows are cases in point. I mean, the proposed development, it's not a magical space, as some people are kind of characterizing it. It'll diminish the magic that currently exists on the island. I mean, a lot of what the doctor just said, I agree with. And however the trust characterizes it, this plan is for an obtrusive, massive buildings to be placed in the only public space of its kind in New York City. You can put a corporate-style climate center in a number of places, but you can only, do what you do on Governor's Island on Governor's Island. It's unique. And yeah, sure, the financials are important and all this, and I understand that. I'm trying to shove that aside. But to focus on the vision or the interpretation of what the island is there for, the website, some of the terminology is rather telling, using the terms like urban development and real estate, for example, to point to certain sections of information. And people keep referring to open space or saying that open space will be increased. I know people have sort of addressed this a bit, but open space, what's being described as public access space, it's not truly open space. Open space is not just surface, but places with unobstructed sky, think air rights, for example, and the freedom to wander about without feeling that you're on private property. And anyhow, you get the point there. Like right now on Governor's Island, you can just wander through yards and onto porches and yards and places like that, and it's wonderful. And on page 76 of the Urban Design Overview PDF, proposed rezoning goes beyond the current Northern Ireland regulations by allowing co-ops and condos and market rate and affordable rentals. I guess, I'm not sure if that was pointed out earlier, but I guess that's part of what the conversation's been about today, but I just wanted to flag that. And regarding finances, in the press, the Climate Change Center is being touted as a game changer for the city's economy, projected to create 8,000 direct new jobs and $1 billion in economic impact for New York City. So, it seems to go beyond just financing the island. In any case, not putting buildings in the West Development Zone would go a long ways in preserving the South Island's open feel. Maybe that's where you could put some, sports type amenities or other places, types of things there instead. And thanks everybody for all the hard work.
Thank you very much, Roger. I think we've heard loud and clear about people looking for more open space and more sports. Claire, do you feel the need to, or can I keep going?
No, thank you, Roger. I do just want to clarify the comment about residential, which again, this proposal absolutely does not allow luxury condos or rental units in any way, shape, or form. So, but thank you for your comments.
Well, that does. I think Tiffany Winbush is going to go next because Jacqueline, I don't have you signed in. I'll take a look again, but if you didn't sign in before, please sign in now so we have first and last name. Tiffany, if we can unmute you.
Tammy, I think we lost Tiffany along the way. I don't see her name on the attendees list.
So I will ask, her question is, what possible plans could there be for affordable housing within this? And that is a question that is relevant because although, Claire, you have no plans now, when the deed restriction is up, permanent housing is a possibility. So condos are a possibility, and that number is still a little bit murky based on the presentation and Rosa's feedback. So the question, I guess, that Tiffany was aiming at is what possibilities are there for affordable housing instead of condos when the deed restriction is gone?
Thanks, Tiffany. Can't really speak to the 2062 scenario, just given that it is 40 years away, but I do want to just clarify the number, which we're not trying to make murky. The maximum square footage that would be allowed on the South Island of residential FAR is about 700,000, which is 17 or 18% of the total FAR being requested. If that scenario were to arise in 2060, I'm sure there would be, and there'd be another ULURP, there'd be a whole public process around that to talk about affordability and otherwise. But our hope and our intent is that by that time, we're going to have a fantastic climate center. And so that scenario is not going to arise at all.
Okay. All right, moving along. Let's see if I can find in the public area, Wendy. Oh, Joe, did you want to say something?
Yes.
Oh, Joe, go ahead.
When I moved down to this area, where I lived was a Mitchell Lama housing. 40 years later, it's now private. So 40 years goes very fast, and there should be some protection. Thank you.
Thank you. I hear you. All right, Jeff Chetirko, Chetirko from Urban Assembly Harbor School.
Yes, hi, you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, great. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the students, teachers, staff, and families of the Urban Assembly New York Harbor School. My name is Jeff Chetirko. I'm the proud principal of this amazing high school located on Governor's Island. Over the last 6 years, a tenure longer than any previous principal on the island, I can assure you that the logistics of running this school is no easy feat. However, with the appropriate support from the Governor's Island Trust and all members of their team who work to make this awe-inspiring island, which it is each and every day, we are able to provide our exceptional hands-on maritime education curriculum to our diverse student population and help break them into the maritime job field after graduation. There is no secret that while we aim to provide this unique program to our students, our school community feels that we have not been properly supported by the New York City Department of Education to reach our goals. We have communicated for years that as a maritime school, Harbor School requires additional specific resources like a pool, additional space, appropriate funding for equipment, and work-based learning opportunities. Not having these resources would be like trying to run a theater program without an auditorium or an art school without additional funding for paint. And now when Governor's Island, our home, is looking to bring a climate center to the island, we couldn't be more excited to support this work. We are excited about the potential it brings to further develop our own school's growth. This vision aligns with our school's mission in educating our diverse city about climate change while continuing our restoration work around the New York Harbor with our students and staff alongside the Billion Oyster Project. As read in the New York Times, Claire Newman stated that the Perspective Climate Center would offer public programs and be anchored by a university or research institute that would build and pay for its part of the campus. She and her team have shown an overwhelming commitment to our school community that Harbor School could be one of the public programs to work in conjunction with the Climate Center, as well as opening the door to potentially work with an incoming university or research institution which could offer internship and post-secondary opportunities for our own students and for all public school students in our city. It is our hope that the New York City Department of Education can recognize this as an opportunity to engage in conversations with the Governor's Island Trust and our school community to grow and align our work with the city's need to increase our maritime education and climate restoration development. This will directly impact the ability to provide equitable opportunities for our diverse city population to be better represented in the maritime industry. We hope that Community Board 1 can assist in bringing representatives from the New York City Department of Education, School Construction Authority, Governor's Island Trust, and our school community together to plan on how the space is used on the island and how this climate center can positively impact our New York City public schools and our city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Claire. I got a couple more parents from Harbor School, so I'm going to roll through them next. If you can choose if you want to go now or at the end.
Sure. I'll just say thank you, Jeff, and a quick word that whatever collaboration and convening we can be a part of with respect to additional facilities, obviously we stand ready to do that to assist the Harbor School.
And on that note, we'll recognize Jacqueline Vargas.
Hello, good evening. God bless everyone here. My name is Jacqueline Vargas. I am a mother of a student who attends New York Harbor School. My son was very excited about the marine biology program there because, as you know, it is a CTE high school, and there's not many high schools with a marine biology program. So we did a lot of praying and he got in and we were very excited about it. So now that I hear all this talk about rezoning and development on the island, I'm kind of on the fence about the project. It sounds very nice that you want to develop the island and make it more modern and keep it alive. But at the same time, it sounds, and I agree with the doctor, it sounds like you're trying to destroy the island in order to save the island. And to me, when you keep something as natural and historic as Governor Island, because we did a lot of research, me and my son, he had to for some of his projects in school. The island has many historical stories that go along with it. And to have built a school on there to give it an educational feel, of course, with a marine biology program and scuba diving and boating, it serves the purpose, right? Because it's on an island. I'm definitely for the building of a pool for the students who are in the scuba diving CTE program. I'm definitely for a gymnasium for the school. I mean, the island is pretty big. In visiting the island, the many times that I've gone there now that my son is a high school student there, I've come to appreciate the islands more. And I don't think there's any better way of helping the students out than having them build these extra facilities that they need. One of my concerns was I see one of the buildings or the residential areas that you want to build is very close to where the school is right now. So one of my questions were, what were your concerns or your considerations in building one of the buildings that you do want to build so close to the high school? Are you concerned about the safety of the children, how it covers the school with in consideration with the height of the school? And then my other concern is I keep hearing the residential and there's not going to be luxury hotels, or there is going to be luxury hotels. There's a lot of comments about it. But then what kind of community are you trying to attract to the island? Is it more of an upscale, high-end, business type of feel community that you're trying to attract? Or are you trying to keep it homey and historical and keep it part of the New York City feel that we have here, because we have much history? So as a parent and as a citizen, I'm concerned for my son and his well-being and his education. right? Because it's why we tried so hard to get in there, and it's a wonderful school. And then my other concern as a citizen is taking away from the island in order to give to the island. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move to Grace Mack, continuing on the parent theme for Harbor School. Grace?
Hi, thank you for this opportunity to address the issue. I'm also a parent of New York Harbor School. Apparently, my daughter is actually a sophomore who attends it. She transferred in 3 weeks prior to COVID, so she didn't really have a chance to even experience the whole offering of the whole Harbor School, what the whole experience is. But what it is really missing is the aquatic training center that, these kids cannot properly train for a maritime school if they don't even have the proper facilities to even, be on site. To travel all the way to, Bushwick, it's hard. And now that we're in COVID, and also where, the Bushwick facility has been closed down, they'll never experience, proper training. So I asked that, that we just get a pool, a facility with a gym, as well as, auditorium where it can be used, not just for the school, but also a shared amenity that can reap great benefits for the GI community as well as the general public. So we ask that, something can be done as soon as possible, because we've been asking for this for a very long time. Thank you.
Claire, I can keep rolling. I got 4 more to go.
4 more parents or?
Nope, actually 3 more in the public comment, and they are not Harbor School parents.
Okay, great. Thank you both. We very much appreciate the comments. As mentioned earlier, we are absolutely prepared, ready, willing, and able to, sit with the community of parents, the Jeff, the school community, SCA, and DOE to talk about needed facilities. In addition, I think there was a question about the historic character of the island. That's very, very important, essential to this proposal. Will actually help us to bring those North Island buildings back to life. I think what we're really looking to do here is honor the history and the character of Governor's Island while creating a financial revenue stream to help support it. Again, no luxury residential as a part of this proposal. And if I think back to the sort of core principles that we talked about at the very top of the presentation, this idea of supporting a diverse community, ensuring that access remain affordable at all turns, fostering public engagement, and making sure that we're thinking about how to utilize the island in the spirit of its location in the center of harbor and unique ecology. Those are all the core tenets that we're going to continue to follow as we advance this plan. Thanks, Tam.
Perfect. My pleasure. Malin Mehta from RPA. Malin, are you still here? And I apologize if I've brutalized your name.
No, you got it right. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
So thanks again for having me. My name is Malin Mehta. I'm a senior associate at Regional Plan Association, and I'll be providing some comments in support of the zoning and creation of the South Island Special District. RPA played a major role in the transformation of Governor's Island. Throughout the mid-1990s, RPA led and incubated the Governor's Island Alliance, a coalition of more than 45 organizations dedicated to transforming the island from an abandoned Coast Guard base into an urban park. The coalition's idea of redeveloping the island as a great civic space was the basis for its transfer to New York City control and contributed to the establishment of the National Monument and a 40-acre park. Throughout the following decades, we continued to advocate and facilitate plans for Governor's Island. Through workshops, panel discussions, and tours, we facilitated a process that ensured that the public interest determined the reuse of the island. In addition, RPA fought against overdevelopment and proposals that were not consistent with these goals, including Mayor Giuliani's proposition to place a casino on the island. The coalition also recognized the need to identify uses that would generate revenue for maintaining the island as a whole, including its bulkhead and piers, park spaces, its ferry system, and other infrastructure. Revenue from maintenance will come directly in the form of leases and hosting uses that generate enough visitor traffic to support the ferry service and concessions. RPA celebrates the important milestones that have transformed Governor's Island, but we also recognize that there is more work needed before completing the vision for the island that was developed over 2 decades ago. The proposed rezoning would help fulfill the goals envisioned by the coalition. The proposal would increase public connections between the park and waterfront esplanade and add an additional layer of protection for all open space on the South Island. The rezoning would offer development and leasing opportunities that would anchor a global center for climate solutions in the heart of the harbor. Consistent with the uses identified by the coalition over a decade ago, the zoning framework would allow for a mix of academic, commercial, nonprofit, cultural, convening, and hospitality uses, anchored by a climate research and educational center. As New York Harbor continues to become a flashpoint for the impacts of climate change, RPA applauds the Trust's decision for initiating this process. While we understand the desire to designate specific urban design and use considerations applicable to the proposed development zones, eastern and western subareas, an overly prescriptive set of rules might have the unintended consequence of impeding the type of research the center could perform when evaluating coastal resilience solutions. The new zoning should allow the research center to perform testing of construction techniques, evaluate structure typologies and materials to investigate their effectiveness in climate adaptation and coastal resilience. Similarly, the zoning framework should ensure that the type of activities associated with prototyping and laboratory work are allowed and listed in the permitted use groups. These types of uses would allow for synergies and partnerships with local manufacturing facilities to flourish, particularly those located along Brooklyn's waterfront in Sunset Park and in the Navy Yard. Given the goal of anchoring a research center for climate change solutions, we think it's important to ensure that the zoning framework provides sufficient flexibility in terms of urban design and programming considerations. With this zoning framework, Governor's Island Trust is taking another bold step towards fulfilling the goals envisioned by the coalition over 20 years ago, and we look forward to supporting the plan throughout the land use review process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's much you need to add to that, Claire.
Thank you. Yeah.
Betty Kay, I apologize, Betty. I did not see your hand up earlier. Do you want to go now, Betty?
Thank you. I had to unmute, sorry. I want to thank you, Claire, for having and presenting tonight. I support the proposed creation of a sustainable revenue stream that would guarantee the quality of the open space that everyone seems to agree is a treasure on Governor's Island. That revenue stream would also keep Governor's Island from competing for city funds that are desperately needed for the many much needed city services that cannot be funded with a public-private partnership, and that's important. I also applaud the proposed creation of a sustainability center for climate change, for climate solutions, something very appropriate as it would be dedicated to one of Lower Manhattan's biggest threats. Drawing experts and being able to offer educational activities would be a huge benefit to local residents, the city, and the science community. Finally, I want to speak in support of counting the promenades as open space. As someone who cannot walk and use parklands the way able-bodied people do, I note that many walkers and joggers, as well as wheelchair users, consider the promenades as more than transportation corridors. Some might only consider grass as open space, but I find enjoyment in all unbuilt space, both visually and for diversity of activity options. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you, Betty. Okay, I'm going to go. Sorry about that. You know, normal life, kids coming in from soccer games and stuff behind me, so I apologize for the stuff. Marge Richards, you are next. Following Marge, we're going to go with Daniel and Diego, and I think those might be our last. I will check again. So Marge, you're next.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of students and parents of the Urban Assembly New York Harbor School. My name is Marge Richards, and I am the co-president, PTA president. We have all chosen a harbor school for our children because of the uniquely experiential education it affords. We all learn best and most deeply by working and doing. My daughter is a senior in the marine biology research program at the school, where she is researching the effects of bacterial aerosols on our health. This is sophisticated work on a college level which is encouraged and supported. Our bio department, for one, has memos of understanding with multiple universities such as SUNY Stony Brook, NYU, and BMCC. And our upper class students are paired with mentors in their biology research projects from all over the world, from the University of Australia in Sydney to the Netherlands, Amsterdam Universiteit. As our oceans and their species are like the proverbial canary in the coal mine, we want you to know climate change research is already happening at the Harbor School each and every day. Now, as Jeff said, it is no secret that we parents and students, principals, past, and our wonderful cover principal have been asking for the possibility to take this school to an even higher level in this area of science that is relatively new and growing rapidly. To do that, we obviously need basic facilities. We need an aquatic training center with a pool built to accommodate its scientific application, where one end is the minimum required 10 feet for depth for diving, where the promise of swimming, where ostensibly students are being trained for maritime professions on the water, but where 50% of them come to us not knowing how to swim, is reinstated, as it was part of the school at its inception. For our ocean engineering students, for our aquaculture students, for every part of our curriculum where access to water is paramount. The lack of this facility has been holding us back. We see no reason why our school's needs can't be compatible with this new vision of the Trust for a climate change laboratory. Imagine how a gym and an aquatic center could be a valuable and desirable shared amenity for new residents of the island, not to mention the 900,000 summer visitors who would flock to swim there. And that such a facility could be used by the school at reserved times in the day and by tenants in the days and evenings and weekends during the 9 months school is in session, and be open to the public the other 3 months, as per the symbiotic relationship of Stuyvesant and Barry Park City. But while we have been patient, we would also like to see real progress on this soon, as this plan certainly makes it clear the future of Governor's Island is upon us. We are very grateful for the community board support for this Harbor PTA's request for space to fulfill the mission of the school about water in a city on water. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Marge. I think Claire has already answered that, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to Diego. And before I do, Marge, don't forget, please come to the Youth and Ed Committee, where we are trying to broker a lovely conversation between Harbor School, the SCA, and the Trust to see what we can do to help with Councilmember Chin's support. Diego, off to you.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of Community Board 1. My name is Diego Segolini, and I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I've been living and working in downtown for about 20 years and on Governor's Island for more than 10 now. I'm also the co-executive director of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, also known as LMCC. We're a nonprofit arts organization dedicated to serving, connecting, and making space for artists and local communities with programs focused on sustainability. As one of the first anchor tenants of Governor's Island since the departure of the U.S. Coast Guard, LMCC is thrilled to see, after so many years, an achievable proposal come together to provide the Trust for Governor's Island with a forward-looking plan to become economically sustainable and thrive in the long term. We applaud both the plan for the southern end of Governor's Island and the Trust's continued commitment to providing increased access to the many communities that see Governor's Island as an exceptional place to work, learn, play, and visit. LMCC was among the inaugural partners that took a leap of faith with the city and state, the Alliance, and GIPEC in defining the island as a cultural destination more than 10 years ago. As you know, we've invested substantially on the island and created space at the Art Center at Governor's Island for working artists and generative public dialogues on sustainability and creativity. We host several dozens of visual, performing, and interdisciplinary artists in artistic residencies every year at Governor's Island. Thousands of visitors have explored the Art Center, where we've exhibited works by some of the internationally renowned artists like Simone Lee, Jenny Holzer, Richard Serra, and Michael Richards. We see the future of Governor's Island and the Trust's current proposal as a continuation of the past 10 years of remarkable, balanced growth, one that's aligned with a vision for generating income for the island to continue its activities while also preserving its unique ecosystem and character. We at LMCC stand by the generous vision of a truly community-oriented, partnership-driven public space outlined in the Trust's proposal, one that's a home by and for all New Yorkers, offering a multitude of opportunities to learn, grow, and play and work in this bucolic setting. We strongly believe that a global climate center will create pipelines for jobs, educational opportunities, all while expanding the island's public parkland and building upon its existing framework of cultural and environmental programming. The current proposal, we believe, supports an exemplary model of urban mixed use. It would ensure that the parkland and the island remains impeccably maintained and accessible as a year-round cultural treasure where all participate in a shared vision of sustainability. So we strongly encourage the committee to support this vision and model for the future of Governor's Island and our fellow New York City residents. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. I wanted to there are a couple things in the Q&A that we didn't get to, and I know that those people have been here for a while, so I just wanted to see if we could get some answers to some of the questions. How much of the 4 million square feet would be allotted for the Climate Center? How many feet higher from the current esplanade is the design flood elevation? And what flood-resistant uses might be located in the space underneath the proposed buildings? Question mark for field space.
Great, thank you, Isaac. The exact amount of how much of the 4 million square feet would be used for the Climate Center will be determined by the future RFP, but in our EIS and the model that we've put into our financials and what we believe is feasible, Chris, stop me if I'm wrong, is just around 1 million square feet.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah, about 1.2 million.
How many feet higher from the current esplanade is the design flood elevation? It varies a little bit, but around the island in general, the sort of current base elevation ranges from 9 to 13. Ben, is that right?
Yeah, so I'm happy to answer. The existing grade ranges from about 9 to 10, and then the design flood elevation in the eastern development zone is predominantly 13, spots of 14, and then on the western, I believe it is 14, and the difference is about 5 feet between the existing esplanade elevation and the design flood elevation.
If you think about, in some respects, it's sort of hard to tell today because the transition is rather gradual, but the park itself is the sort of lowest parts of the park are all at that elevation. And so that transition from the water to there is about parallel, as Ben said, about 4 to 5 feet. Great idea on field space under the proposed buildings. That's interesting. We don't have those programmed yet because that will also be determined by the future RFP process. But there are ways where you could provide adequate flood elevation without lifting the whole grade and sort of allow that. I don't know, basement's the wrong word in a case like this, but that lower level to be used by flood-resistant uses. Were there other? I think there's other questions in here, Tammy. I don't know if you want me to scroll through and try to answer them.
I got them. I got you on there.
Okay, thanks, Tammy.
Okay. Dr. Bruce Trigg, who spoke earlier, commented that December is not outside the visitor season. especially because there should be visitors all year. The shadows are not trivial. I would echo his concerns because the shadow modeling that you had on there put the harbor school in shadow in the coldest months of the year. So that is something that I would ask you to take a look at that development zone, if there's any way to change that or push the development back. That was a major issue if you look at the shade studies. I can't imagine anything worse than a school based on working with water being in the shade on the island in December. Just saying, because I know how cold it is down here. Wayne Benjamin asks, will the academic research institution be linked to CUNY or SUNY?
Thanks, Wayne. The CUNY or SUNY and other academic institutions obviously will be invited to respond to the RFP, but it is certainly our hope that in this conversation around educational pipelines, that will be part of the proposal, and we have been talking to CUNY actively.
How is the financial feasibility impacted if the FAR remains at 1 and not increased above to 1.24?
Great, thanks. So that we would not get to financial feasibility with the that's basically a 25% decrease. Tammy, I think when I pulled up the slide earlier, basically what we're proposing now has a teeny bit of cushion, which is all the sort of other revenue that's a little bit hard to rely on. But if we went to exactly level up expenses with revenue, it would be about a few 100,000 square feet, which is maybe 8%. So anyway, not that big a reduction.
And then you may see his last question about design guidelines envisioned for new construction, and that definitely goes with what
Yes.
Vicki said and conversations we've had before about, what insurances that can we bake in and where for passive house and other design elements that have been discussed.
Yes, and there will be design guidelines as part of the RFP. Again, working with DCP on that, but we're also working with the Community Advisory Council, members of the CUNY board, et cetera, on what exactly that could look like.
Would the power generation deed restriction prohibit building designs that include solar or wind?
No, the power generation deed restriction is for power generation for off island. Wesley, that's right. Right. So if we had a solar panel or geothermal, like I mentioned earlier, that's okay. There's similar rules like that around like waste transfer. Like no one wants to see a big waste transfer station on the island, but obviously the island itself is going to have to deal with its waste.
Right. And then I guess the question is, when the deed restriction goes away in 2060 or 2062, is there anything that says that power could not be generated for off use? And does that include things like electric filling stations if we were ever in this city to be able to be progressive enough to do all electric ferries?
Good question. I don't know about the electric filling stations. I do know that the zoning, and Wesley, jump in here, would not allow, the proposed rezoning would not allow the creation of like a big cogeneration facility or something like this. Wesley, is that accurate? I think it just allows like transformers and.
I guess the question is.
Some station, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You could do accessory, if it's cogen or accessory use to an on-island facility.
So you could have, for example, electric charging stations for the boats, as long as they were part of the service for transportation for the island.
That's correct.
Okay. Awesome.
Oh, Tammy, I think you're on mute.
I think we have Daniel Reynolds, who's from the board of the Friends of Governor's Island, who still would like to speak. Daniel, do you have anything new that Merritt has not covered?
Well, I just wanted to voice the support as a CB1 board member and CB1 resident and a member of the board of Governor's Island, and just say that I think we're at a pivotal point in the island. I think it can either become much more than it is today. It can be, as so many people have said, a 365-day destination and full of amenities, or it really has a challenge in meeting the expenses to stay the island that it is today, and those services that we enjoy now could be slowly but surely cut back without developing new stable revenue flows. So we're on the board. We on the board support the proposal. We think that this is a path towards developing a stable source of revenue that's going to allow for year-round ferry service, other crucial services that will help the island realize its full potential, and we support the proposed rezoning.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, let's see. I think I'm going to give one last call for public comment. Okay, I'm going to give one last. Exactly, that's why I'm thinking we get to go home now. All right, so I think if we haven't heard, I think we've heard from everybody who signed up to speak. So I think we got everybody. Diana, do you have anybody else?
I don't see anybody else.
Fern, do you see anybody's hands up?
I see hands that hadn't gone down, but they've spoken.
Perfect. So then, Bob Schneck. Bob has not spoken. Bob, you are going to be our last. Rosie, you need to let Diana know if your hand's still up. If not, Bob Schneck, you're the last commenter. And then I'm going to make a motion to close the meeting if Farron will accept it after Bob.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I think the issue here is opportunity. And I think that at this period in time, there's nothing more important, or one of the most important issues is climate change. And addressing that so often loses ground against the present. And I think in this particular case, it's very important. Actually, the question is the idea a Center for Climate Solutions and making that a scientific center, is that a really important idea? And is it really worth an extraordinary investment of the public? And I think it is. I think that really exploring uses for the island, that's a really great one. And I think that if there really are educational institutions that are interested in that, it would be really wonderful to have them express what their ideas are so that we could get a feel of that going forward. But I really couldn't be more in favor of this idea at this time. Thank you.
And as much as I thought we were 100% done, I was wrong. Sorry. I'm going to go back to Rosa. And yep, Rosa's got her hand up.
I'm sorry. I just want to say also that there is a 150 car parking allowance here in the zoning text. And so I'm wondering, well, first of all, I'm a little concerned about the safety issues of having entry points, even if they're limited on the park side. So I'm thinking that obviously the perimeter, the Esplanade, would be safer to have the vehicles access parking rather than where, children who are not looking where they're going are running around gleefully at fast speeds. And then that still brings me right back to the whole, the width of the Esplanade, because if we're planning for 150 cars to be able to park on site, then that also the vehicles will be taking up a significant amount of space. Sorry, I know that that's my little pet thing. But then I wanted to also end by saying, we love the park. We love what you've done with the park. We love being in the park and having Father's Day, barbecues in the park and, playing ball and kiting and all of that stuff. And you guys have done an exceptional job. And I do trust that you are going to handle this project and development well. But I think that the things that we are concerned about are real issues that we hope you'll take into consideration and put a lot of deep thought into, because I think it will make it better. And so I'm fully in support of you guys getting financially self-sufficient. I think that that will only be good for the park. And I think that development there, some may be very against it, some may like it. Probably not that many people love it, but I think that it's necessary for your self-sufficiency. So I am fully in support of that. But please keep the primary mission of the park, the public park, fully in focus and centered in this entire journey that we're on. So that was it.
Thank you, Rosa. We hear you, and we absolutely will do that. And we're also obviously all taking active notes so that we can do exactly what you described, which is take all of this feedback and these questions into consideration to make the plan better. So thank you.
And then you've got some comments about, obviously lower rise for development that are in here and things. And I think, Diana, anybody else?
I see Isaac and Gerald. I don't know if they still have to speak. I'm unmuting you both. Okay, well, if it's both of you, I'll do one at a time. Go ahead, Isaac.
No, thank you. I sorry.
Great.
I posted some questions and they were answered, and Andrew and Janine did a great job regarding fields, so I'm good with that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Isaac. And going to Gerald.
Oh, I don't know that I had my hand up. I did say in the question and answer, I got the chat, just thank you all, CB1, the trust, the neighbors, everybody who's been involved in this this project for many, many years. Thank you for your commitment to the project.
And I think that's a lovely way to end. Fern, can I call?
Yes,
Can I make a suggestion to call it?